Lock the door, Sarah. Turn off the lights and pretend you're not here.
No, bring him inside.
That's what every single person in Mason Ridge told her that night. 67 motorcycles, Hell's Angels patches, a blizzard that had shut down the highway for 40 miles in every direction, and one man lying face down in the snow, not moving. Sarah Whitmore stood behind that locked door for 11 seconds. She counted them later. 11 seconds that would change everything she thought she knew about fear, about people, and about what it really means to be brave. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind came first. It always did in Mason Ridge, Montana, in the deep throat of winter. This particular kind of wind that didn't just blow, it pushed it, pressed it, got personal. It found the gaps in window frames that had survived 30 Montana winters and decided tonight was the night to make itself known through every single one of them. It rattled the hanging coffee mugs above the counter. It made the neon open sign in Sarah Whitmore's window buzz and flicker, like it was trying to warn somebody about something. Sarah heard it and paid it no mind. She had 37 things to worry about before she got to the weather. The grease trap under the flat-top grill needed replacing. The replacement cost $412, and she had $219 in the account that wasn't already earmarked for something else. The walk-in cooler had been making a sound for the past week, not a bad sound, exactly. More like a sound that was deciding whether it wanted to become a bad sound. The women's restroom faucet ran cold even when you turned it all the way to hot, and 2 customers this week had come out and mentioned it in that particular polite complaint tone that people used when they were thinking about not coming back. And then there was the letter. The letter from First Montana Bank sat on the back counter, folded, refolded, and folded again, as if the number of creases in it could somehow change what the number inside it said. 30 days. That was what Gerald Hastings, the bank's regional manager, had written in the kind of formal language that made something devastating sound almost reasonable. 30 days to bring the outstanding balance current, or the property would enter foreclosure proceedings. The property, her father's diner. Sarah pressed her palms flat on the counter and breathed. She was 34 years old, and she looked at tonight in the way that women who work 14-hour days and raise a child alone sometimes look their age all at once, like it had been saving up. Her blonde hair was pulled back because there was no point in it being anything else during a dinner rush, even a dinner rush as thin as this one. She had her father's hands wide across the palm, short-fingered, the kind of hands that were made for work, and knew it. Behind the counter, she moved the way she always moved in this diner, efficiently, without wasted motion, because she had learned from watching her father that a small space demanded small movements, and that everything had a place, and the place mattered. Dale Whitmore had built this diner with those same hands, not built it. He hadn't poured the foundation or framed the walls, but he had built it in every way that mattered. He had found it when it was a failing pie shop with bad lighting and a reputation for cold coffee, and he had turned it into something that people in Mason Ridge and 50 miles in every direction knew by name. Whitmore's. You don't need to describe it beyond that word. People in this county understood what that word meant. It had meant hot food and a fair price and a seat for anyone who walked through the door, no matter what they looked like or how much they had in their wallet or what the rest of the town thought of them at that particular moment in time. Dale Whitmore had been a man with a philosophy about human beings, and his philosophy was simple. People are more than what you see first. He had said that to Sarah so many times during her childhood that it had become less a lesson and more a piece of furniture, something that was just there, always solid and unmoving in the background of everything she did. She had been running this diner for 4 years now, since Dale had his stroke, and then 8 months later, the second one that finished the first one's work. She had taken over because there was nobody else, and because the alternative was watching something her father loved get sold to strangers, and because if she was being honest with herself, in a way, she rarely allowed herself to be honest anymore because she needed it. She needed a reason to get up in the morning that was bigger than the debt and the fear, in the long, awful silence of the house at night after Danny was asleep. Danny, 9 years old, 3rd grade, currently asleep in the small office at the back of the diner in the little cot she had set up there for nights when the storm or the hours made it impractical to drive home. He had his father's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw and a habit of asking questions at 6 in the morning that Sarah was genuinely not intellectually prepared to answer before coffee. His father, Marcus. She let the thought arrive and then she let it leave the way she always did now. Marcus Whitmore had departed Mason Ridge in Sarah's life 18 months ago with the kind of quiet efficiency that still amazed her when she thought about it, as if he had been planning the exit long enough to know exactly what to take and exactly what to leave, and had made his calculations accordingly. What he had taken himself their joint savings account and approximately $4,000 of business debt that he had somehow failed to mention existed until it appeared on a bank statement 3 days after he was gone. What he had left Danny the diner the house with the leaky roof and a silence so complete that it had its own physical weight. She hadn't cried. Not about Marcus, not the way she'd cried about her father. You cried about things you'd lost. You didn't cry about things that had never actually been what you thought they were. She put the bank letter in the drawer under the register. She started a fresh pot of coffee. Outside, the wind made its feelings known again. The first call came in at 7:42. It was Brent Calloway from the gas station 2 blocks down, and he was using the voice he reserved for things he considered himself personally responsible for warning people about. Sarah, not a greeting, a preamble. Brent, you watching the highway cam? She wasn't. She didn't have a highway cam. She had a kitchen and a half-empty dining room and a coffee maker that was starting to make a new sound that she was choosing not to investigate until morning. Tell me what I'm missing, she said. Motorcycles. His voice dropped, which was something Sarah had never heard Brent Calloway's voice do before. Brent Calloway's voice existed at one volume, and that volume was approximately 2 notches above comfortable. A lot of them, coming down off Route 12. They've been up in the mountains, must have gotten caught in the front that came through. How many? A pause. The counter on the cam says 67. Sarah looked out her front window into the dark and the driven snow and saw nothing but the parking lot and the highway beyond it and the wall of white that the blizzard had built across everything north of town. Okay, she said. Sarah. His voice did something else she had never heard it do. It became careful. I can see the patches on the lead bikes. It's Hell's Angels. I'm not saying that to start something. I'm saying it so you know what's coming down that road. She was quiet for a moment. Are they doing anything? She asked. Are they threatening anybody? They're on the highway, Sarah. They're not doing anything yet, but they're coming toward town and the highway is closed north of here and the motel is already full and your place is the only commercial establishment with lights on. So they're going to come here, she said. That is what I am calling to tell you, Brent said. I would turn the lights off. I'm telling you that as someone who has been in this town for 43 years and has some understanding of, thank you, Brent. She hung up. For exactly 3 seconds, she stood behind the counter with her hand still resting on the phone and looked out at the parking lot. Then the phone rang again. It was Donna Marsh who ran the insurance office next door and had opinions about almost everything that happened within visual distance of her building. Then it was Carl Hendricks from the hardware store calling from his house 3 streets over because Brent had apparently called him first and Carl had called 3 other people before getting to Sarah. Then it was Pat Nguyen, who was the closest thing Sarah had to a friend in this town, calling from her kitchen where she was feeding her kids dinner and sounding genuinely frightened. Lock the door, Pat said. I'm serious, Sarah. Don't be a hero about this. Lock the door and turn the lights off and let them figure out their own situation. One of them might be hurt, Sarah said. She didn't know why she said it. She hadn't seen anything yet. You don't know that. I don't know anything yet. That's the point. Sarah, I'll call you back. She put the phone down and looked at the empty diner around her. 4 customers had paid and left in the last 20 minutes, each of them offering some version of the same advice on their way out the door. Stay safe, be smart, keep the door locked. The subtext of all of it was the same. You're alone here, and alone means vulnerable, and vulnerable means you make the smart choice, and the smart choice is the one that keeps you behind glass. Sarah walked to the window and looked out. They appeared at the edge of her vision like something from a dream, the kind of dream that you wake from uncertain whether it was frightening or magnificent. Headlights, dozens of them, sweeping through the snow-thick dark in a procession that moved slowly, deliberately, like something that had learned patience the hard way. She could hear them now even through the walls and the wind, the low collective rumble of engines that had been running for too long in too cold air. She watched them pull into her parking lot. She watched them park. She watched 67 men and women in leather and denim climb off their bikes in the Montana cold and stand in the snow with the particular stillness of people who are exhausted past the point where exhaustion feels like anything specific. And she watched one of them, a broad-shouldered man in a road captain's vest, take 3 steps away from his bike and go down. Not fall, not stumble, go down. The way someone goes down when the last thing keeping them upright has quietly excused itself and left. He went down in the snow and he did not get up. Sarah Whitmore had done the Red Cross first aid certification course once when she was 22 because her father had insisted, and once 3 years ago because she had a 9-year-old in a commercial kitchen and had decided that having done it once at 22 was probably not the same as having done it recently. She knew what cold exposure looked like because she had grown up in Montana, and Montana had opinions about what happened to bodies that spent too long in its winters. She knew what it looked like when the dangerous part was already happening. She unlocked the door. She went outside. The cold hit her like a physical thing. Not a sensation, but a decision, the way Montana cold felt when you stepped into it without a coat, like the air had looked at you and made a personal choice about you. She crossed the parking lot in her apron and her non-slip shoes, and she went directly to the man in the snow. The people standing around him parted for her. She registered this distantly, that 66 large people in Hell's Angels patches stepped back to make room for a small blonde woman in a diner apron without anyone saying a word. She filed it away and didn't think about it yet. She went to her knees in the snow beside him. "What's his name?" she said, not looking up, her hands already on him, checking. "Walker." A man's voice. Deep, the kind of voice that had been through weather. "Ethan Walker. He's our road captain. We got stuck in the pass for 3 hours before the highway patrol opened the route back down. We didn't know it had gotten that bad." "How long was he on the bike in the pass?" "All of it. He refused to be the one to shelter when we couldn't all shelter." She processed this and moved on. "Is he diabetic? Any heart conditions I should know about?" "Not that I know of. He's healthy. He runs. He takes care of himself." "Healthy people die of hypothermia," she said. It came out more blunt than she intended. She looked up for the first time. The man standing over her was somewhere in his late 50s, maybe touching 60, with a face that had been built by experience rather than genetics. Lines that weren't age so much as accumulated weather, accumulated decisions, accumulated years of being the person other people looked to when things went wrong. He had dark eyes that were right now doing something that she suspected they rarely did. They were afraid. "I know," he said. "I know that." "My name is Sarah," she said. "I own this diner. I'm going to need 4 of your people to help me get him inside, and I need them to do exactly what I say, and I need you to make sure that happens." "I'm Jack," he said. "Jack Reynolds. And yeah, anything you need." She looked back down at Ethan Walker. "Okay, Ethan," she said quietly, not to the crowd, not to Jack, just to him, just the 2 of them there in the snow. "I've got you. You stay with me." He didn't respond, but something in his breathing shifted just slightly, and she chose to believe he heard her. Inside was chaos organized by necessity. Sarah directed the 4 men who carried Ethan through the door to lay him along the padded bench of the largest booth, and then she was at the supply closet pulling blankets. She kept 4 for emergencies, a habit her father had instilled because you always kept things for emergencies, and she was barking instructions over her shoulder in the direction of whoever was listening. "I need the thermostat up to 78. Somebody find it. It's on the wall by the hallway to the bathrooms. I need warm water, not hot warm, and I need it in a basin. There's a basin under the prep counter, second door from the left." "I got it." A woman's voice, competent, no hesitation. "There's a first aid kit in the office, back right corner on the top shelf. Somebody get it." Going. She worked on Ethan. She removed his outer vest, his jacket, the gloves that had done their job as long as they could, and then stopped being able to do it. His skin was the color that told her things had gotten serious, but his pulse was there, slow but there, and his breathing was present, shallow, like someone sleeping too deeply in a place that was too cold. "Talk to me," she said to Jack, who had positioned himself just outside her immediate radius and was watching her the way people watch someone diffusing something. "Is he a big drinker?" "Ethan, no." "Any medications?" "Not that I know. I can ask." While Jack turned and moved through the crowd with a quiet authority that parted people without requiring any visible effort, Sarah kept working. She checked Ethan's core temperature through feel and proximity in 3 years of Montana winters, in the particular kind of knowledge you develop when you pay attention. She got the blankets around him. She elevated his feet slightly using the folded jackets that someone had appeared beside her with. Without being asked, she noted this person and glanced up and found a woman in her 40s with steady hands and an ex-nurse's calm about her. "You have medical training," Sarah said. 20 years ago, the woman said. "Angela, I'll do whatever you need. Stay next to him. If his breathing changes, shallow or irregular, stops, you yell immediately." "Understood." Sarah stood up and turned around and found herself facing 50 or 60 people crammed into a diner built for 38, all of them looking at her, and for one very specific second, she felt the full weight of what she had just done. She had unlocked the door. She had brought all of them in. She had made a choice that Pat and Brent and Donna and Carl and every single person in Mason Ridge who had called her in the past 40 minutes had told her was the wrong choice. And here she was standing in the middle of the consequence of it, and there was a man in a booth who might be dying, and 66 more people were standing in her diner with their helmets in their hands and their road-worn faces and their Hells Angels patches, and they were all looking at her. She took a breath. "Okay," she said, "here's how this works. We're all stuck here until the storm breaks, which means we've got a few hours at minimum, probably more. I have food, and I have warmth, and I have a working bathroom, and you're welcome to all three. I need the tables cleared off and the chairs moved to give us room. If you're willing to help with that, I'd appreciate it. I've got a propane camp stove in the back that I can use to supplement the main range, so I can feed more people than this kitchen was built for, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take everyone being patient." She paused. Nobody said anything. "Any questions?" she said. A beat of silence. Then a man near the back, heavy-set 50s beard, that had clearly been growing since the Clinton administration, raised his hand like he was in a classroom. "What can we do?" he said. What followed was the strangest hour and a half of Sarah Whitmore's adult life, and her adult life had contained some genuinely unusual hours. The bikers reorganized her diner. They did it without being asked and without being told twice about anything. Tables moved, chairs stacked. Someone found the push broom in the back hallway and started on the tracked-in snow and slush without being directed to it. Someone else, the same woman Angela had gotten Ethan's core temperature, responding and had him wrapped in 3 layers of blanket and was sitting next to him, monitoring him, talking to him in the low, steady voice of someone who remembered how to do this. Jack Reynolds stood at the end of the counter and watched all of it with the particular expression of a man who had learned over a long career of watching people to catalog what he saw without letting the cataloging show. "You didn't hesitate," he said. He wasn't accusing, he wasn't complimenting, he was simply noting a fact. Sarah was behind the counter working 2 burners simultaneously because feeding 67 people on a diner range was a math problem, and she was doing the math. "He was down in the snow," she said. "What was I supposed to do?" "What everybody else told you to do, Perno," Jack said. "Brent Calloway from the gas station called 4 people in the time it took you to come outside. I know that because 2 of them drove by slowly enough to see what was happening and didn't stop." She looked up from the range. "You know Brent Calloway?" "I know the type," Jack said. "Every town's got one." She went back to what she was doing. "How long has Ethan been with your chapter?" 11 years. He came in from Oregon, lost his wife, lost his job, and the same year needed somewhere to land. We were somewhere to land." She paused just briefly at this, the way a sentence can reconfigure something. "He okay generally, I mean. Before tonight." "He's good," Jack said. "He's one of the good ones." A pause. "Most of us are actually, though. I understand why people don't lead with that assumption." She looked at him again. He looked back. Something passed between them, not a romantic thing, nothing like that, something more durable than that. A mutual recognition. The look of 2 people who had been underestimated long enough to have developed a working relationship with the experience. "I know," Sarah said. She turned back to the range. At 9:15, Danny appeared in the doorway of the back office. He was wearing his dinosaur pajamas and holding the small blanket he still slept with, but had recently begun insisting he didn't need any more. And he stood in the doorway, taking in 60-some bikers eating diner food in a space that felt about twice as full as it was built to be, and his expression was not the one Sarah had been braced for. He wasn't afraid, he was fascinated. "Mom," he said, "why are there so many motorcycles in our parking lot?" "Come here," she said. She lifted the pass-through counter and he ducked under it and came to stand beside her. She kept cooking. The highway closed. These people needed somewhere warm. "Oh," he looked out at the dining room. "Are they going to eat all the soup?" "Probably." "Do we have enough?" "I'm working on it." He leaned against her side the way he had done since he was small enough to fit entirely under her arm. She let him. She kept her eyes on the range and let him lean. "Mom musta," he said quieter. "Yeah, babe." "That man in the big booth, is he okay?" She glanced toward Ethan's booth. Angela was still there, still monitoring. She had gotten some warm broth into him in the last 20 minutes, which was a good sign. His color was changing slowly back towards something that looked like a person. "He's going to be okay," Sarah said. Danny nodded, processing this. "Then did you help him?" "Angela's helping him right now," Sarah said. "I helped him first." Another nod. He was quiet for a moment, watching the dining room, watching these strangers who had arrived out of the storm and were now sitting in his grandfather's diner eating chicken soup and talking in voices that had come down from the road level to something more like human scale. "Grandpa would have let them in," Danny said. Sarah stopped stirring. She stood very still for a moment. "Yeah," she said, "he would have." By 11 o'clock, Ethan Walker was sitting up. By 11:15, he was talking. By 11:30, he was arguing with a man named Chuck about whether he needed to keep the third blanket, on which Angela had already voted yes on, and which Ethan was contesting on the grounds that he was, in his words, sweating like a man in a sauna. "The sauna is keeping you alive," Angela said with a patience that suggested she had extensive experience winning arguments with difficult patients. Sarah brought him soup. He looked at her when she set the bowl down, and for a moment neither of them said anything. He was maybe 45, hard to tell under the weathering. Clear eyes once the hypothermia fog was lifting. The kind of face that had been through difficulty without bitterness, which was a specific kind of face that Sarah recognized because she was trying to maintain one herself. "You came outside," he said. "You were down," she said. "You didn't know us. You were a person down in the snow." She kept her voice even. "That's all I needed to know." He looked at her for a long moment. "My wife would have liked you," he said. Sarah absorbed this. What was her name? Claire. "Was she good people?" "The best I ever knew," he said. "Until tonight, maybe." She shook her head. You don't know me yet." "I know what you did," Ethan said. "Sometimes that's enough." She left him to his soup. At midnight, the storm had not broken. At midnight, Sarah Whitmore stood at the window of her father's diner and looked out at 67 motorcycles parked in the lot, snow settling on them. With the patient persistence that Montana snow brought to everything it decided to cover, and she thought about the bank letter in the drawer, and the grease trap that needed replacing, and the walk-in cooler that was maybe deciding to become a problem, and the leaky roof on the house, and the $400 she didn't have, and the 30 days on the clock. And she thought, this is a lot. This is a tremendous, overwhelming, completely unreasonable amount of things for one person to carry. And then she heard Danny's voice from the back, where he had apparently woken up again, and wandered out and somehow ended up in a conversation with the bearded man near the hallway, the one whose hand had gone up first, the one who had asked what they could do. And she heard Danny's high, clear voice saying something about his grandfather and the diner, and the man's low, rumbling voice responding with a seriousness and attention that 9-year-old boys did not always get from adults. And something shifted in her chest that she couldn't quite name. She had let them in. Every warning, every phone call, every voice telling her to lock the door and turn off the lights and make the safe choice, she had heard all of it, and she had walked out into the snow anyway. And now 67 people were warm and fed, and Ethan Walker was sitting up arguing about blankets, and her son was talking to a biker in the hallway about his grandfather like it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about what Jack had said, what everybody else told you to do. You didn't hesitate. She had hesitated. 11 seconds. She had counted them. But she had opened the door anyway. And right now, in this particular moment, with the storm pressing against the windows in the diner full of strangers who were becoming one conversation at a time, something a little closer to not strangers right now, that felt like the truest thing she had done in a very long time. Behind her, someone laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that comes out when something actually catches you by surprise, and it spread from one table to the next the way real laughter does, catching on something human in everyone it touched. Sarah turned from the window. She went back to work. The drawer under the register held a letter that said she had 30 days. Tonight that letter could wait. The laugh that had broken loose near the back booth at midnight was still doing its work when Sarah turned away from the window and looked at what her diner had become. Not a battlefield, not the thing every phone call in the last 2 hours had been warning her about, something else entirely. Chuck, the bearded man who had raised his hand first, whose hand-raising had struck Sarah as one of the most unexpectedly courteous gestures she had witnessed in her adult life, was deep in conversation with Danny, and Danny was doing the thing he did when someone was actually listening to him, which was talking with his whole body. Hands moving, head-tilting words tumbling out in that particular 9-year-old rush that happened when the faucet got opened all the way. Sarah caught fragments across the noise of the diner. Grandpa built the counter himself. The stools came from a bowling alley in Billings. The pie case is original. It's from 1987. That's before I was born. That's before my mom was almost born. Chuck listened to every word. He nodded. He asked follow-up questions. He treated the architectural history of a small Montana diner as if it were the most interesting subject currently available to him, which Sarah thought, moving behind the counter, refilling coffee, it might genuinely be. Jack Reynolds was still at the far end of the counter. He had not left that position in over an hour. He had a coffee cup that Sarah had refilled twice without being asked, and he held it the way men who have spent decades on motorcycles hold things lightly, with the particular grip of someone who has learned that the road can change direction at any moment and you need to be ready to let go. "You should eat something," Sarah said, sliding a plate toward him without asking what he wanted. She had made a judgment call based on an hour of observation. 2 eggs over easy. Toast, hash browns because she was running low on everything else, and hash browns were the most efficient use of what remained. He looked at the plate, then at her. "You didn't ask what I wanted." "You've been standing at that counter for 90 minutes watching your people," she said. "You haven't eaten. You weren't going to ask, so I didn't ask either." He looked at the plate again. "Over easy," he said. "I noticed." He picked up a fork and ate, and Sarah moved down the counter to where a woman in her 30s, short hair, road-roughened hands, the kind of quiet that wasn't shyness, but something more deliberate, had been sitting for the last 20 minutes with a cup of coffee she'd barely touched. "You want something hot?" Sarah said. "I've got soup left, some biscuits." The woman looked up. Her eyes were red, not from crying exactly, but from the kind of sustained tension that sat in the same neighborhood as crying and sometimes converted. "I'm okay." "You were on the bike behind Ethan when he went down," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. The woman was quiet for a moment. "How did you know?" "Because you haven't relaxed once since you came in and you keep looking at his booth." Another pause, longer. "Melissa," the woman said finally, "I've ridden with Ethan for 6 years. He's the one who convinced me I belonged in this group when I wasn't sure I did." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "When he went down, I didn't know what to do. I just stood there." "You flagged me down," Sarah said. Melissa looked up sharply. "When I came out the front door," Sarah said, "someone made eye contact with me right away and pointed at him. That was you. I wasn't thinking. I just needed someone to do something, and I didn't know what to do, and you were there." "That's doing something," Sarah said. "That counts." Melissa looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone who had been told something they needed to hear and weren't quite sure yet whether to believe it. "Eat," Sarah said. "I'll bring you a biscuit." She moved back to the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Melissa exhale the long, slow release of someone who had been holding their breath without knowing it. At 12:40, Ethan tried to stand up. Angela, who had been sitting vigil with the patience of a woman who had won every argument she'd ever had with a difficult patient, put her hand flat on his chest and pushed him back down with an efficiency that suggested she had done this exact motion many times before and would continue doing it as many times as necessary. "I just want to stretch my legs," Ethan said. "You want to prove you're fine," Angela said. "There's a difference. I am fine. You were in the snow for 40 minutes below critical temperature, and your core temp was at the low end of what I would call technically alive," Angela said pleasantly. "You can stand up when I say you can stand up." From across the diner, a man Sarah had come to understand was named Rico. He had introduced himself to 3 separate people in her vicinity. In the past hour, called out, "She's right, Walker. Sit down." "Nobody asked you, Rico." "I'm asking myself. I'm a concerned citizen." Laughter scattered and real moved through the room. And in that moment, that specific, unremarkable, completely ordinary moment of 2 people bickering and the room laughing, something shifted in the diner. Sarah felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure. Something that had been tight, held carefully, breath held, and watchful loosened by 1 degree. She was behind the counter watching it happen, and she thought, there it is. That's what happens when people stop performing and start just being. Jack had been watching it too. He put his fork down and he looked at Sarah and he said, "My wife used to say, there's a moment in every gathering where people decide whether to be guests or neighbors. I never understood what she meant until just now." "Is she?" Sarah stopped. "3 years ago," Jack said. "Cancer. I'm sorry." "She would have loved this," he said. He looked around the diner with something in his face that Sarah recognized because she had worn it herself often in the past 3 years. That particular look of people who have lost someone and keep finding them unexpectedly in the middle of ordinary moments. She always said the problem with people is they forget we're all the same kind of scared. Sarah thought about the bank letter. "That's true," she said. Jack looked at her. "You're scared right now," he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was the kind of observation that people with very good eyes make about things that other people are working hard not to show. She met his gaze. "I've been scared for about 18 months, she said. "I'm getting good at it." "What happened?" She thought about whether to answer. Then she thought about what her father used to say about walls, that you build them to keep things out, but mostly what they keep out is help. "Husband left," she said. "Left some debt behind that I didn't know about. Bank wants this place in 30 days if I can't get the balance current." She kept her voice flat, the way you keep your voice when you're delivering facts and you need them to stay facts and not become feelings. "It's a lot of money. It's the kind of money I don't have." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Your father built this place," he said. "You were listening to Danny." "I listen to everyone," Jack said. "It's a habit. How long has it been in the family?" "Since 1987. My dad bought it when I was 8. I grew up in this diner. After he died, She stopped, restarted. "It's not just a building." "I know," Jack said. 2 words, but he said them like he meant them, and Sarah believed he did, and the believing of it did something in her chest that she was not prepared for at 12:47 in the morning, in the middle of a blizzard with 67 bikers in her dining room. She turned back to the range. She did not cry. She had not cried in 11 months, and she was not going to start now, not here, not in front of people who needed to see someone who had things under control. But it was a closer call than she would have admitted. 1:15 in the morning brought a development Sarah had not anticipated. The dishes. She had been working through the logistics of feeding 67 people with a kitchen built for a Saturday brunch rush, and the arithmetic of that had produced a genuinely impressive quantity of dishes. And the dishes had been accumulating at the back of the kitchen in the way that dishes do when you don't have a second person on the line, which she hadn't had since she'd cut Marcus from the payroll, and then not replaced him because replacing him cost money she didn't have. She turned around from the range and found 3 people at her sink, not her employees. She didn't have employees on tonight, just herself. These were people she had never met before, 12 hours ago. People whose names she was still learning, and they were at her sink, washing dishes with the focused efficiency of people who had decided something was going to happen and had appointed themselves to make it happen. The one in the middle, she recognized the man named Tommy, who was maybe 60 thin, with the kind of forearms that told you he had worked with his hands for most of his life. On his left was a woman Sarah didn't know yet. On his right was Chuck, who had apparently extracted himself from the Danny conversation long enough to find a dishcloth. "You don't have to," Sarah started. "We know," Tommy said without looking up from the sink. She stood there for a second. "The big pots need to soak first," she said. "Already soaking," he said. She went back to the range. At 1:22, Danny reappeared at her elbow. He had changed from his dinosaur pajamas into jeans and a sweater at some point, which meant he had made a social calculation that she found extremely touching. He was 9 years old, and he had decided that the pajamas were not the right outfit for receiving guests. "Chuck says he used to cook for 60 people at a time," Danny said. "Did he?" "In the Marines, he was a cook," For the Marines, did you know the Marines have cooks? I did know that. He said the secret to cooking for a lot of people is not to think about how many people you're cooking for. You just cook the same thing you always cook, and you cook enough of it. Danny paused. He also said your biscuits are better than anything he made in the Marines. Sarah looked up. Across the diner, Chuck caught her eye over Danny's head and gave her a small, genuine nod. She looked back at her son. Think you can help Tommy with the dishes? She said. Danny's face did the thing it did when he was given a real job, a kind of solemn, brightening responsibility and excitement occurring simultaneously. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I can do that. He went. She watched him go, watched him insert himself between Tommy and the unknown woman at the sink, watched Tommy shift to make room for him without hesitation or awkwardness, as if a 9-year-old in a sweater joining the dish line at 1:30 in the morning was the most natural thing in the world. And for a moment, Sarah Whitmore stood alone at her range in the diner her father had built, and she thought, Dale, you should see this. You would not believe this, and you would love every single second of it. At 2 in the morning, Jack found her in the back hallway. She was sitting on the step outside the office door with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and she was holding it because the act of holding it was the closest thing to a break she'd managed since 9 o'clock. Jack looked at the cup. That's cold. I know. Why are you drinking it? I'm not. I'm holding it. He sat down on the step beside her, which was slightly too narrow for 2 people, but neither of them moved to make it work better. They just occupied the space that was available. How often do you do this? He said. Run this place a Lenin at night. Most nights, she said. That's a lot. That's the math, she said. I can't afford another person and I can't afford to close, so. How long? Since Marcus left, 18 months. And before that, she thought about it. Marcus was here, which was, she stopped, found a more honest version, which meant I wasn't alone technically, but he was never really here. Jack was quiet, and in the quiet she heard the diner sounds, the low rumble of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter, the clank of Tommy's dishware, Danny's voice asking a question about something, and she was aware suddenly and completely that these sounds were different from the sounds her diner usually held at 2 in the morning. At 2 in the morning, her diner was usually empty. At 2 in the morning, there was usually nothing here but the hum of the cooler and the wind outside and the ticking of the clock above the register and the particular weight of being alone with something you were afraid of losing. Can I ask you something? Jack said. You can ask. Why did you really come outside, and don't say it was because Ethan was down? You had 67 people in your parking lot, and every person who called you told you to stay behind the door. Most people stay behind the door. Sarah looked at her cold coffee for a moment. My dad had a rule, she said. He had a lot of rules, but one main one. He said you don't get to call yourself a good person and then find reasons to not act like one. You either do the thing or you don't. The reasons don't matter. Jack absorbed this. Your father sounds like someone I would have wanted to know, he said. He would have been out of that door 30 seconds before me, Sarah said. He probably would have had the coffee started before you even parked. Jack smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it changed his face substantially, took 20 years off it, or maybe just returned 20 years that circumstances had borrowed. What was his name? Jack said. Dale, she said. Dale Whitmore. Good name, Jack said. Good man, she said. They sat for a moment in the narrow hallway with the sounds of the diner wrapping around them, and Sarah thought about 30 days and $400 in the grease trap and the walk-in cooler, and then she decided very deliberately not to think about those things for the next 5 minutes. She had earned 5 minutes. She took them. So, the storm broke at 3:15. Not all at once. Montana storms didn't work that way. They didn't apologize and leave. They thinned, first pulling back from their own ferocity into something that was still serious, but no longer absolute. The wind dropped by half. The visibility, which had been approximately 12 feet for most of the night, extended itself tentatively outward. Sarah heard it change. You learned growing up in Montana to hear the weather think. The diner's noise level shifted too as people registered the change and began the collective calculation of what came next. A hum of conversation that moved toward practicality, how far to the next city, what the road conditions would be, whether the pass was going to open before morning. But not yet. Not yet, because the highway was still officially closed and the temperature outside was still at the point where a motorcycle was a genuinely bad idea. And because Sarah suspected nobody in this room had been particularly in a hurry to leave, she went to check on Ethan. He was awake. More than awake, he was sitting fully upright, blankets still around his shoulders, and he was talking to Melissa, who had finally at some point in the last hour brought her coffee to his booth and was now sitting across from him with her hands wrapped around the mug and something in her face that was lighter than it had been. Sarah assessed him from 6 feet away with the trained eye she had developed over the course of the night. Color good, posture strong, eyes clear. She exhaled something she hadn't quite realized she'd been holding. Ethan noticed her looking. "I'm good," he said. "I can see that," she said. "I mean it. I'm not just saying it to get the blankets off." "Angela decides about the blankets," Sarah said. "I'm just checking on a guest." "Is that what we are?" Ethan said. "Guest," she looked at him. "What would you call it?" He thought about it seriously. "I'd call it something else," he said, "but I don't have the right word yet." Melissa looked between them and didn't say anything, but something in her expression said she understood exactly what he meant. At 4:10 in the morning, the highway patrol cleared Route 12. The word came through on someone's phone and moved through the diner the way information moved through groups, fast, uneven. Everyone hearing it at slightly different times and turning to confirm it with the person nearest them, and the confirmation sending a ripple through the room that Sarah watched from behind the counter. She had been expecting this moment, and she realized now, quietly dreading it. Because the math was simple. The highway opened, the group left, the diner returned to empty, and tomorrow was tomorrow with everything tomorrow contained. She started making coffee, not because anyone had asked, but because it was the thing to do. The last useful thing she could offer, a cup of something hot for the road, and she needed her hands to be doing something that wasn't shaking. Jack came to the counter. "We'll be out of your way in 20 minutes, he said. "You're not in my way," she said. It came out more raw than she intended. He looked at her. She looked at the coffee maker. "We're going to take care of the bill," he said. "Everyone, full price. Don't try to, Jack." "Full price," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that didn't leave room for argument. "You fed 67 people. You kept Ethan alive. He stopped. Something moved through his face. "You treated us like people. You understand how rarely that happens." She wanted to say something dismissive, something pragmatic. She had a catalog of those responses, had been building it for 18 months. She didn't use any of them. "I know," she said. "I know how rarely it happens." He nodded. "Then let us do this right." The 20 minutes it took for 67 people to gather themselves, check their gear, and prepare to ride was the loudest and the most kinetic the diner had been all night. People were laughing and arguing and making the specific kind of noise that groups make when they have been through something together and are on the other side of it when the danger has passed and the warmth is still in the bones and the road ahead is open. Sarah moved through it. She filled cups. She wrapped up the remaining biscuits and pressed them on people who she could tell hadn't eaten quite enough. She found Danny's jacket, which had somehow ended up at the booth nearest the door, and retrieved it before it walked out with someone. At 4:22, Tommy stopped in front of her. He was holding something out, a folded piece of paper. "My number," he said. "I do kitchen installations. I've been doing them for 30 years. I heard you talking about the grease trap." He nodded toward the kitchen. "I can come back next week. We can look at it." She looked at the paper. "Tommy, I can't afford." "I didn't say anything about money," Tommy said. "I said I can come look at it." She took the paper. Chuck was behind him. He had Danny's complete and total attention, which was the most valuable thing in the diner. He was writing something in Danny's notebook, the one Danny carried everywhere, the one he called his fax book, in which he recorded information he considered important enough to keep. "What are you writing?" Sarah said. "Recipe," Chuck said. "Best chili in the continental United States, and I'm writing it for a man who appreciates good food." Danny looked up at his mother with an expression of complete vindication. He had been telling her for 2 years that he wanted to learn to cook real food, and she had been giving him age-appropriate compromise recipes that did not satisfy him at all. "We'll talk," she said. At 4:37, Ethan Walker stood up on his own 2 feet for the first time since the parking lot. Angela watched him like a hawk. He stood straight, color fully returned, the blankets finally gone, and he looked across the diner at Sarah, and he said loud enough for the room to hear, "I need to say something." The room went quiet. It did it fast, the way rooms do when the right person speaks. This woman came out of that door tonight when every single person in this town told her to keep it closed, Ethan said. He wasn't performing. His voice was level and direct. She didn't know us. She didn't have a reason. She just came outside and knelt down in the snow next to a man she'd never met and put her hands on him and said she had him. He paused. I've been riding for 20 years. I've been in every kind of weather and every kind of trouble and every kind of place. And I have never been in a room where I felt what I felt in this diner tonight. Nobody spoke. So, Ethan said. He looked at Sarah directly. Thank you, that's all I've got. Thank you. The applause started somewhere near the door and moved backward through the room. Not polite applause, real applause, the kind that comes from the chest rather than the hands, the kind that has weight behind it. Sarah stood behind her counter and felt it land on her. All of it, and she held herself very still, because if she moved, she wasn't sure what would happen, and she needed to hold herself together for approximately the next 60 seconds. Danny appeared at her side. He slid his hand into hers without saying anything. She held on. They left in stages, not all at once, the way 67 people leave a space gradually in clusters, the room thinning from the edges inward. Engines started outside. The sound of the group reforming the familiar rituals of departure that Sarah had watched through the window from the beginning, now playing out in reverse. Jack was the last one at the counter. He had left what she could only describe as a significant amount of money next to his coffee cup, and she had not said anything about it because she had read his face earlier and understood that saying something would be refusing something, and she was done refusing things that were being offered in good faith. The road captain position you mentioned, Sarah said. It had been nagging at her. Ethan, does that mean he was responsible for everyone's route, for the decision to take the mountain pass? Jack looked at her. Yes. And he stayed out longest because he felt responsible for the situation. That's correct. She thought about this. That's a hard thing to carry. He's been carrying harder, Jack said. He picked up his helmet. We all do. She nodded. She started to say something else and stopped because the thing she was going to say was, take care of yourselves, which was something she said to regulars, to people who came back, and Jack Reynolds and his 66 riders were not regulars. They were people she had met once on a night that the weather had arranged specifically, it seemed, for this purpose. She didn't know if she would see any of them again. She said it anyway. Take care of yourselves, she said. Jack put on his helmet. He looked at her through the visor for a moment, just long enough to be deliberate, and then he raised one hand, a single gesture, and walked out the door. Sarah watched them go. She stood at the window and watched the motorcycles file out of her parking lot in the early morning dark engines, low and purposeful headlights, sweeping the snow-covered road, 67 people, carrying the night with them on their way to wherever they were going next. The last taillight disappeared around the curve. The parking lot was empty. The diner was quiet. Sarah looked at the counter, at the used cups, in the cleared plates, in the dish-clean kitchen that Tommy and Chuck, and the woman whose name she'd never gotten, had produced while she was cooking at the booth, where Ethan had lain now straightened by someone's careful hands, at her son's notebook, left open on the counter, to Chuck's chili recipe, written in a biker's careful block letters. She looked at the money Jack had left. She counted it. She stood there for a long time after she counted it, not moving. It was not enough to cover the bank's 30-day demand. It wasn't close to enough for that. But it was real, and it was there, and it was given with the kind of intention that made money feel like more than money. She folded it, put it in her apron pocket. She picked up Danny's notebook and carried it to the office, where she settled him back onto the cot. He had fallen asleep upright on the bench nearest the kitchen, sometime after 4, exhausted by the extended social occasion, and she tucked the blanket around him and looked at his sleeping face, at the dark hair and the stubborn jaw, at the particular perfection of a 9-year-old's sleep. Your grandpa would be so proud of you tonight, she said quietly. He didn't stir. She straightened up. She went back to the counter, picked up a cloth, and began to wipe it down. Outside, the sky was doing what Montana skies did after a storm, pulling back from darkness towards something that was not yet light, but was making its intentions known, that particular gray blue that preceded the actual dawn by 40 minutes and served as the horizon's way of clearing its throat. Sarah wiped the counter. She thought about the letter in the drawer. She thought about the 30 days. She thought about Ethan saying, you didn't know us. She thought about herself saying, you were a person down in the snow. That's all I needed to know. And then she stopped wiping the counter and she stood very still in the quiet diner and she said out loud to no one, to the empty room, to the ghost of her father who had built this counter with his own hands, I'm not going to lose this place. Not a plan, not yet, just a declaration. The kind that comes before the plan, the kind that makes the plan possible, the kind that her father had taught her was the real first step toward anything. She said it once. It was enough. She folded the cloth, set it on the counter, and went to make a fresh pot of coffee. Dawn was coming. She had things to do. The fresh pot of coffee Sarah made at 4:50 in the morning was the best coffee she had made in months. She didn't know why. Same beans, same water, same machine that had been threatening to develop a personality for the past 6 weeks. But something about the silence of the diner after the storm, after the engines, after 67 people filling every square foot of space she owned, something about that particular quality of empty made the coffee taste like something her father would have approved of. She drank it standing at the counter, looking at Chuck's chili recipe in Danny's notebook. Block letters. Careful. The handwriting of a man who had spent years writing things that needed to be legible under difficult conditions. The recipe had margins notes not here, meaning don't skip this, and a note at the bottom that said the secret is patience. You can't rush chili. You can't rush anything worth eating. She tore the page gently from the notebook, folded it, and put it in her apron pocket next to the money Jack had left. Then she sat down for the first time in 8 hours on the stool at the end of the counter. Her stool, the one her father had always occupied when the diner was quiet and he was doing the books, and she let herself sit. Her feet hurt. Her lower back had an opinion. Her hands, which had been doing something every minute for the past several hours, didn't know what to do with stillness and kept making small, restless movements against her thighs. She let them. Outside, the sky was making good on its earlier suggestion of dawn. She could hear the highway, distant, tentative traffic, the first vehicles testing the road after the storm's decision to step back. A snowplow somewhere working through its routine with the methodical persistence of machinery that did not have feelings about weather. She thought about the bank letter. She got up and got it from the drawer and unfolded it and read it again, which she had been avoiding doing because reading it again never changed what it said and always made the number inside it larger somehow, the way numbers grew when you looked at them in the wrong light. 30 days, Gerald Hastings' signature at the bottom, which was the signature of a man who had delivered this kind of news often enough that the delivering of it had become procedural. She did not think Gerald Hastings was a bad man. She thought he was a man who had learned to keep a useful distance between himself and the consequences of his job, and that this was probably the only way to do his job, and that this did not make it easier to be on the receiving end of his signature. She put the letter on the counter in front of her. She looked at it. She said out loud to the letter, I told you I'm not losing this place, so figure out a way to work with me. The letter did not respond, which was appropriate because it was a letter. But saying it out loud again felt necessary. It felt like the second payment on a commitment she had made the night before, and she understood instinctively that commitments required installments, that you had to keep paying into them, or they became just words you'd said in an empty room. She folded the letter back up. She did not put it in the drawer. She left it on the counter where she could see it. Danny woke up at 7:15 with the particular confusion of a child who had fallen asleep in one context and woken in another. He appeared in the office doorway with his blanket still around his shoulders, looked at the empty diner, looked at his mother at the counter, and said, Did everyone leave? They left around 4:30, Sarah said. He processed this. Did Ethan leave too? The man who was sick. He did. He was better. Danny came and climbed onto the stool beside her, dragging the blanket, and looked at the counter with the expression of someone taking an inventory. His eyes landed on the bank letter. What's that? He said. A letter from the bank. A bad one. Sarah looked at her son. He was 9 and he was sharp, and he had been listening to adult conversations with one ear for long enough that he had developed a working understanding of the emotional categories of adult male. It's a complicated one, she said. Danny thought about this. Is that why you're up at 7 in the morning after being up all night? That's part of it. What's the other part? She looked at him. Thinking. About what? About what comes next, she said. About what I'm going to do. Danny pulled the blanket tighter around himself with the gravity of a small person taking a meeting seriously. Chuck said something last night, he said, when we were doing dishes. What did he say? He said that his commanding officer used to tell him when everything looks impossible, find the one thing that isn't and start there. He paused. He said that's how you get through anything, one thing at a time. Sarah looked at her son for a long moment. Chuck's pretty smart, she said. I wrote it down, Danny said, in my notebook, after the recipe. She thought about the page she'd torn out, now folded in her pocket. Show me later, she said. She got up and made him breakfast. She made eggs and toast and orange juice, and while he ate, she did the books from the night before, and when she tallied what 67 people had paid full price, every single one. No shortcuts as Jack had promised, she sat with the number for a long time. It wasn't enough, but it was real, and it was the most single-night revenue this diner had generated in 4 years. She thought one thing that isn't impossible. Start there. The days after the storm settled into the particular quiet that Mason Ridge specialized in following a weather event, the kind of quiet that was not peace so much as recovery. Roads cleared. Routines resumed. The diner returned to its usual rhythm of truck drivers and regulars, and the occasional traveler who had found the place on a map app and was mildly surprised that the food was as good as the reviews claimed. Pat Nguyen came in on Monday morning, which was her habit, and sat at the counter and ordered coffee and a cinnamon roll, and looked at Sarah with the expression of someone who has been sitting with a feeling for 3 days and has decided to release it. Tell me everything, Pat said. Sarah told her. Not everything. She kept Jack's conversation in the back hallway to herself, and she kept the moment with Danny and the blanket and the applause to herself, because some things were not for retelling. Some things existed only in the original and lost something in the reproduction. But she told Pat the shape of the night, the bones of it. Pat listened without interrupting, which was significant because Pat was a person who interrupted. When Sarah finished, Pat was quiet for a long moment. You should have called me, Pat said finally. You told me to lock the door. I know what I told you. Pat wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. I'm saying after they were in, after it was clear that... She stopped. I should have been there. It was fine, Sarah said. That's not the point. Pat looked at her. You've been doing everything alone for 1.5 years, Sarah. Everything. You call me when something is wrong, I'll come. That's what I'm telling you. You can call me. Sarah looked at her friend, at the honest frustration in her face, which was not frustration at Sarah, but frustration at the situation, at the 1.5 years of watching from a not quite close enough distance and not knowing how to close it. I know, Sarah said. I know I can call you. Okay, Pat said. Okay, Sarah said. They drank their coffee. What are you going to do about the bank? Pat said. I don't know yet, Sarah said. I've got 27 days. Pat nodded slowly. My cousin knows someone who does debt restructuring. He's in Billings. He's good. He helped her friend keep her house after the divorce. Give me his number, Sarah said. Pat had it in her phone. She texted it before she left. Sarah added it to the list she was building. The list was short, but it was a list, and lists meant she was moving. And moving was better than sitting with the weight of things she couldn't change. On Wednesday, Tommy called. She had not entirely expected him to call, though she had hoped he would, because Tommy had the energy of a man who made commitments easily and honored them absolutely, which was a specific type of person Sarah had developed a strong instinct for identifying. I'm in Billings this week, he said. I can be there Friday afternoon, just to look. No obligation. Tommy, I want to be clear that I can't. No obligation, he said again, with the patience of a man who has had this conversation before and does not intend to have it more than 3 times. I look at it, I tell you what, I see you decide what you want to do with that information. That's it. She said yes. On Thursday, the walk-in cooler made its decision and became a problem. Not a catastrophic problem, not a shutdown, the kitchen problem, but the sound it had been developing for 2 weeks resolved itself into a definitive verdict. The compressor was going. She called the refrigeration company in Great Falls, and the man who answered gave her a number that required her to sit down. She sat down. She wrote the number on the notepad next to the register. She looked at it for 10 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and wrote next to it one thing at a time. She called Pat's cousin's contact in Billings. His name was Ray Dominguez, and his voice on the phone was the voice of someone who had heard a lot of bad financial situations and had developed a professional equanimity about them. Not a cold equanimity, but a warm one, the kind that said, I have seen worse, and the worst ones got better, and so will this. Send me everything, Ray said. Bank correspondence, the original loan documents, your revenue history for the past 2 years, your debt schedule, everything. I'll look at it over the weekend. And then, she said, and then I'll tell you honestly what I see, which is what you need right now, an honest read, not a guarantee, just the truth about where you stand. Okay, she said. Okay, he said, and Sarah, he paused. Pat told me a little about your situation. You're not as cornered as the bank letter makes you feel. Banks write letters like that because most people don't know the difference between a threat and an opening negotiating position. Just keep that in your back pocket until we talk. She held the phone for a moment after he hung up. She thought one thing at a time. Friday came. Tommy arrived at 2 in the afternoon, which was the dead space between the lunch rush and dinner, and he came in through the back like someone who had spent his life working in commercial kitchens and understood the geography of them instinctively. He had a bag of tools, and he had another man with him, younger, quiet, with the attentive look of an apprentice who had learned to watch before speaking. This is Garrett, Tommy said. He's learning. Garrett nodded at Sarah with the serious nod of a young person determined to be taken seriously. Sarah showed them the kitchen. Tommy spent 40 minutes on the grease trap and another 20 on the cooler compressor. And during that time, he talked in the low, continuous way of a craftsman who was used to working alongside people. Not at them the way her father had talked, information delivered, sideways as if it were incidental, as if he were just thinking out loud and she happened to be there for it. The grease trap was a straightforward replacement. He had the part in his truck, which turned out to not be a coincidence. The cooler compressor was a more serious conversation. The part needed ordering. It would take 8 days. And in the meantime, he had a technique for extending the current one's life that would require her to check it twice daily. How much, she said when he was done, not as a prelude to a negotiation, as a direct question. For the grease trap parts only, Tommy said. I told you. Tommy. Parts only, he said. $240 for the part. I'll invoice you when you have it, no rush. He looked at her steadily. You kept my friend alive. We're going to be a long time working this out. She wanted to say that she had just done what anyone would do. She had said that sentence to several people in the past week, and she was becoming increasingly aware that it was not actually true, that what she had done was not what anyone would do, that what made it meaningful was precisely that most people wouldn't. That the phone call she had received that night, the voices telling her to lock the door, represented the statistically more common response, not the outlier. She didn't say it. Thank you, she said instead. Tommy nodded once, which was his version of, you're welcome. Oh. And then it was 3 days later, on a Monday morning, when everything changed direction. Sarah was alone in the diner at 7:45, the first customers of the day at a corner table with their newspapers, the coffee maker working through its routine, the repaired grease trap performing its function without incident when she heard motorcycles. She was at the register. She looked up. One, she thought, maybe two, someone passing through. The highway had traffic this time of year that ran in rhythms she had learned to read. But the sound didn't thin out. It didn't pass. It grew. She walked to the window. The parking lot was filling, not one, not two. One after another, bikes pulling in with the deliberate economy of people who knew exactly where they were going and had decided to go there until the lot was full and bikes were lining up along the highway shoulder, and Sarah was standing at the window counting and losing count again because the number kept being larger than she expected. 67, all 67. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. The two customers at the corner table had put down their newspapers. One of them, George Mercer, who had been coming to this diner for 22 years and had the particular territorial loyalty of a man who considered his corner booth a personal holding, was looking at the parking lot with an expression Sarah had never seen on his face before. Sarah, he said carefully. I see them, she said. The engines went quiet. All at once, like something choreographed, 67 engines, cutting at the same moment, the silence that followed, so complete that it registered as a sound in itself. Nobody moved toward the diner. They just stood there, arranged in the parking lot, and waited. Sarah stared. Then the front door opened, and Jack Reynolds walked in alone. He was not in road gear. He was wearing clean clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, his cut over it. because the cut was not a costume, it was just part of what he wore. He came in and stood just inside the door and looked at Sarah, and his expression was the one she had learned to read over the course of a single night. Direct, no performance, no preamble. "We need to talk to you," he said. She looked past him at the parking lot. "All of you. All of us," he said. "But I'll start." She gestured at the counter. He sat. She went to the coffee maker and poured 2 cups on automatic pilot because her hands needed something to do while her brain caught up with what was happening. After that night, Jack said, "I went back to my chapter. I told them what happened. The whole thing, the storm, Ethan, you coming outside the night, all of it." He wrapped his hands around the mug, and then word went to other chapters, because that's how we work. Something happens that matters, you tell the people who need to know. Sarah was very still. 3 chapters reached out within 48 hours, Jack said. 5 by the end of the week. People who weren't here that night, but heard about what you did and understood what it meant. He paused. "We've had discussions about a lot of things this week, Sarah. Serious discussions about what you're facing and what we can do about it." "Jack, I'm going to tell you what we're proposing," he said, "and then you can say whatever you want. But let me finish first." She nodded. "Ethan's been making calls," Jack said. "He knows people, contractors, construction, guys, a financial advisor in Missoula who's done pro bono work for small businesses before. Tommy's already involved, you know that. Angela, the woman who sat with Ethan all night, she's a former ER nurse, and she now runs a nonprofit that does community development work. She's got contacts with a foundation that does small business preservation grants in Montana." Sarah's hand tightened on her coffee cup. "There's a guy named Frank Kowalski in our Billings chapter," Jack continued. "He spent 20 years as a commercial banker before he retired. He knows how banks work from the inside. He looked at the letter you got, Tommy described it to him, and Frank's words were, 'That's a pressure tactic, not a death sentence.' He wants to meet with you and go through the actual numbers." "I already have someone looking at the numbers," Sarah said. "Ray Dominguez in Billings." Jack looked slightly surprised, then nodded approvingly. "You've been moving." "I told you I wasn't losing this place," she said. "I remember." The corner of his mouth moved. "Frank knows Ray. They're not friends, but they respect each other." "That's actually better than friends. It means they'll be honest with each other." Sarah set her cup down. She looked at Jack for a long moment, and she felt the particular specific vertigo of someone whose situation is shifting faster than their understanding of it. When the ground you have been standing on, the ground of isolation, of handling it alone, of being the person who carries the thing, because there is no one else, begins to change its nature without your full permission. "Why?" she said. Not ungrateful, not suspicious, just genuinely asking the question that had been underneath everything since the moment Ethan spoke to the room at 4:30 in the morning. "You know why," Jack said. "Tell me anyway." He looked at her with the steady directness she had come to understand was just how he was, not a performance, not practiced. Just the face of a man who had decided a long time ago that honesty was less expensive than its alternative. "Because you came outside," he said. "You had every reason not to. You had 67 reasons not to, and everyone in your town gave you 67 more. And you came outside anyway, and you got down in the snow, and you put your hands on a man you didn't know, and you told him you had him." He paused. "When was the last time anyone did something like that for us?" She didn't answer because the answer was in his face. "We take care of our own," Jack said. "That's our rule. It's the most important rule we have. And you, without knowing it, without asking for anything, without knowing who we were or what we could do, you behaved like someone who understood that rule, like someone who already lived by it." He picked up his coffee cup. "So now you're our own," he said. "That's how it works." The diner was quiet. George Mercer at the corner table had stopped pretending to read his newspaper. The other customer, a woman Sarah knew only as a Tuesday regular, was sitting with her hands in her lap looking at the counter with an expression that Sarah couldn't quite read. "What are you proposing?" Sarah said. "Specifically, what are 67 people proposing to do?" Jack put his cup down. "Today we're proposing to fix your parking lot, which I noticed has a drainage problem on the east side that's going to become a serious issue in the spring. We're proposing to address the structural stuff Tommy identified on Friday. He called me Saturday morning. We've got people who do this work. They want to do it." He met her eyes. And we're proposing to send Frank in to meet with you and Ray together and figure out what the bank actually needs and what the realistic path looks like. Sarah was quiet. That's today, Jack said. Down the road, there's more, but one thing at a time. She looked at him sharply when he said that. He didn't know about Chuck's note in Danny's notebook. He didn't know about the words she had been repeating to herself all week like a compass bearing. Say that again, she said. He looked slightly uncertain for the first time. One thing at a time. Where did you hear that? It's how we operate. You don't fix a bike all at once. You find the first problem and you fix it, and then you find the next one. She thought about Chuck, about a commanding officer somewhere a long time ago telling a group of young men that when everything looks impossible, you find the one thing that isn't. She thought about her father who had said something similar in different words so many times it had become furniture. She thought about the way certain truths keep arriving from different directions until you understand they are not advice but geography, the shape of how things actually work permanent underneath all the temporary mess of specific circumstances. She picked up her coffee cup. Okay, she said. Jack's eyebrows moved slightly. Okay. Okay, she said again. Tell me what you need from me to start. What followed in the next 4 hours was the most organized chaos Sarah Whitmore had ever witnessed, and she had worked commercial kitchens for 15 years. 67 people with a plan moved differently from 67 people caught in a storm. The storm night had been improvised, reactive, shaped by necessity and emergency. This was something else entirely. This had been thought about. Tools appeared from saddlebags and truck beds because several of the group had made the drive in vehicles anticipating what they'd need, which meant this had been planned in advance, which meant Jack had made calls before he walked in the door, before he sat down at her counter, before he told her what they were proposing. He had already been certain. She found this out from Angela, who arrived in a gray pickup at 9:15 with 3 women Sarah didn't know, and a cooler of food and a clipboard, which was the first clipboard Sarah had seen in the context of this situation, and which made her feel simultaneously more and less in control. He was certain, Angela confirmed when Sarah noted the clipboard. Jack's been certain since the night he left. He just wanted to offer it right, not as a done deal, as a conversation. Because you're that kind of person, and he knew it. What kind? The kind that needs to be asked, not told, Angela said. Some people you tell this is happening, get out of the way. Some people you ask, this is what we want to do. What do you think? You're the second kind. She paused. So is Jack, which is probably why he understood it. Sarah looked at the parking lot where the east side drainage issue was already being assessed by 2 men who had the particular crouching, pointing, nodding dynamic of people who had diagnosed this type of problem before and were confirming their diagnosis. What do I do? Sarah said. It came out simpler than she intended, more vulnerable. She had been the one doing the directing all week, the calls, the lists, the moving, the one thing at a time. And now there were 67 people doing organized things in her parking lot, and she didn't know what her role was. Angela looked at her with something that was not quite amusement and not quite sympathy, but contained elements of both. You run your diner, Angela said. You feed people. That's what you do. That's the one thing nobody else can do here, and it happens to be the most important one. The clipboard went into action. Sarah went back inside. Ciao, Ma. Danny arrived at 3:15, dropped off by Pat after school let out, and stood in the parking lot doorway for a full minute, taking in what was happening before his brain produced language. Mom, he said, finally finding her at the counter. I see it, she said. Those are the same people, he said. Most of them. Why are they fixing things? Yes, like our things. Danny was quiet for a moment of deep processing. Then is Ethan here? Sarah looked up. She had been watching for Ethan since 9 o'clock and had not seen him, and she had not asked because she was not sure what the asking would mean. I don't think so, she said. Danny looked at the parking lot again. Then he put his backpack down on the stool and picked up a dishcloth and went to the tables to bust the dishes from the lunch rush, which Sarah had not gotten to yet because the morning had been what it had been. She watched him for a second. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. He kept bussing. She turned back to the range. They worked alongside each other in the quiet that she and Danny had developed over the past year and a half. Not a sad quiet, not an absence of something quiet, but the particular comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other well enough to share space without filling it. It was one of the things she was most grateful for in her son, that he had the emotional intelligence at 9 years old to understand when silence was companionable and when it was lonely, and to offer the right kind. At 4:30, Frank Kowalski came through the front door. She knew who he was before he introduced himself, not from description, but from type. He was 60, compact with the organized bearing of someone who had spent decades in institutional environments and had made peace with wearing it. He had a leather cut over a button-down shirt, which was a combination that should not have worked and somehow did. "Sarah Whitmore," he said. It was not a question. "Frank Kowalski," she said. "Same." He sat at the counter. He had a folder. He put the folder on the counter and opened it, and she saw that it contained what appeared to be a great deal of organized information about her financial situation, which she had not provided to him, which meant Tommy had been talking to Jack, who had been talking to Frank, and the information chain that had formed around her situation in the past week was more developed than she had realized. She should have felt invaded. She searched herself for it and didn't find it. What she found instead was something that felt very cautiously like being seen. "Ray Dominguez called me this morning," Frank said. "We had a long conversation. I want to tell you what we think jointly about your situation, and then I want to hear what you think, and then we're going to figure out what comes next." "Okay," she said. "The bank's position," Frank said, "is aggressive but not terminal. Gerald Hastings, I know him not personally, by reputation as a by-the-book guy. He will negotiate if the negotiation is presented correctly. What he needs to see is a viable path, not a guarantee path. Evidence that the business is sustainable and that the debt can be restructured in a way that serves everyone." "Can it be?" Sarah said. "Direct." She had no time for gradual. "Yes," Frank said, "just as direct. With what we're looking at, your revenue history, which is better than you probably think it is, and some strategic restructuring of the payment timeline, Ray and I both believe a 6-month forbearance agreement is achievable, possibly more." Sarah looked at him. "What does that mean in practice?" she said. "It means the clock stops," he said. "Not permanently, but long enough for you to stabilize, which your revenue curve suggests you can do. This place has been trending up for 4 months. He turned a page in his folder. "Did you know that?" She blinked. "I knew the last 2 months were better than 4 months, Frank said. "Consistent upward movement. Small, but consistent. Do you know what changed 4 months ago?" She thought back. 4 months ago. Late summer. "I added the soup special on Tuesdays," she said. "And I put up some photos of my dad in here. His original menu. People started talking about it. The history of the place." Frank nodded. "People came for the soup and stayed for the story," he said. "That's a model. That's a thing you can build on deliberately." She was quiet for a moment. She had been so deep in the crisis that she had not seen the trend. She had been so close to the numbers, looking at them as individual problems, individual shortfalls, individual days, that she had missed the shape they were making. "Why didn't I see that?" she said. Frank looked at her with the specific compassion of someone who has watched smart people miss things because they were too scared to see them. "Because you're scared," he said. "Scared makes you short-sighted. That's not a character flaw. It's physics." Outside, she heard the sound of work continuing, tools and voices, and the particular productive rhythm of people who know what they're doing. She thought about the letter in the drawer, which was not in the drawer anymore. It was on the counter, visible, a decision she had made Monday morning, a commitment to look at the thing directly instead of carrying it in the dark, where it could grow to whatever size her fear allowed it. "Tell me what I need to do," she said to Frank. "Step by step, starting tomorrow." Frank turned to the next page in his folder. That, he said, is exactly the right question. At 6 o'clock, Jack found her. She was outside for the first time all day, standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching the work crew finish up what they could before losing the light. The drainage issue on the east side had been dug out, assessed, partially addressed, and marked for a second session. The structural issue Tommy had identified at the back corner of the building, a load-bearing question that had been quietly worsening for 2 winters, had been looked at by 2 men with the kind of careful faces that load-bearing questions produced, and their verdict was manageable, which was not the same as easy, but was not the same as catastrophic either. "How are you doing?" Jack said. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know," she said. "I've been in motion all day, and I haven't had time to figure out what I feel about any of this." "That's okay," he said. "Motion is good." "Frank is good," she said. "He's the best I know." He and Ray are apparently aligned, which Ray told me last week was an unusual thing for them to be, which makes me think the situation is not as catastrophic as I've been treating it. It's not, Jack said. It never was. It was serious. Serious and catastrophic are different things. She looked at him. You sound like you've been there. More than once, he said. He was quiet for a moment. When my wife got sick, I did the same thing you've been doing. I looked at everything at once, and I let the everything crush me. A guy in my chapter pulled me aside and told me to stop. Said you can only carry what you can carry. Pick up one thing, deal with it, then pick up the next thing. Chuck told Danny something like that, Sarah said. That night, he said his commanding officer told him to find the one thing that wasn't impossible. Jack looked at her. Different words, he said. Same truth, she said. They stood for a moment in the cooling late afternoon air, looking at the parking lot where people were packing up tools and talking and moving with the specific energy of a day's work done. Jack, Sarah said. Yeah, I don't know how to. She stopped. She was not good at this. She had been the one carrying things for so long that receiving things felt like a skill she had let atrophy. I don't know what to say to you, to all of you, for this. Jack was quiet. Don't say anything, he said finally. You already said everything that mattered. You said it 3 weeks ago when you came outside. She looked at her parking lot, her father's parking lot, the parking lot of a diner that was not going to be taken from her, that was trending upward, that had a financial path and a structural assessment and a drainage solution and a chili recipe from a Marine in her son's notebook, and 67 people who had decided without being asked that what had been done for them in a blizzard was worth more than one night's gratitude. Ethan's not here today, she said. No, Jack said. Is he okay? He's okay. A pause. He's got something he wants to do himself. He asked us to let him do it his way. She looked at Jack. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who knows more than he's saying and has decided that what he knows belongs to someone else. Okay, she said. She went back inside. She had a dinner service to run. The dinner service that night ran longer than any Sarah could remember in the past year. Not because the kitchen was overwhelmed, though it was busier than a Monday had any right to be. It ran long because people lingered, because the tables turned slowly the way tables turn when people have stopped eating and started talking and lost track of time, in the way that people do when the conversation becomes more important than the reason they sat down. She noticed it around 7:30. Table 4, 2 men she recognized as highway workers who ate at Whitmore's every other week and tipped reliably and said very little beyond their orders were talking. Not to each other, which was their habit. They were talking to the couple at table 5, who were strangers, travelers, people who had no context for any of what had happened in this parking lot today. And yet the conversation was animated. And she caught the word motorcycles and the word storm and the word fixed, and she understood that the highway workers were telling the story. Someone else's story had become the thing people told at her tables. She filed this away and kept moving. At 8:15, Pat called. I'm hearing things, Pat said without preamble. What things? Things about 60-some motorcycles in your parking lot today doing construction work. Carl Hendricks called me. He said his brother drove by, and Sarah, is this true? It's true. A long pause. How? Because I opened the door 3 weeks ago, Sarah said. Another pause, different in quality from the first one. Pat was processing something, and Sarah gave her the time to do it because she had learned over 15 years of friendship that Pat's processing sometimes produced the clearest thinking Sarah had access to. Brent Calloway's going to lose his mind, Pat said finally. Sarah surprised herself by laughing. Real laughter, sudden and unguarded, the kind she had not produced in long enough that it felt slightly foreign in her chest. Brent Calloway can take a number, she said. I'm coming in tomorrow, Pat said. I need to hear all of this in person. Come early, I'll make you breakfast. She hung up and went back to the floor, and at 9 o'clock she turned the sign to closed and locked the front door and stood for a moment with her back against it, looking at the diner her father had built. It looked different. Not different as in changed, same counter, same stools, same pie case from 1987, same clock above the register. But different the way a thing looks when your relationship to it has shifted. She had been looking at this diner for 4 years as something she was responsible for saving. She had been looking at it as a weight, as evidence of everything that was at stake. Tonight it looked like what it actually was, A place her father had built because he believed people deserve somewhere warm to land. She turned off the main lights and left the counter lamp on the way her father always had, and she went to get Danny. Tuesday morning arrived with the particular quality of a day that had decided to be ordinary, which after the previous week felt almost aggressive. The coffee mayor ran its cycle. The regular crowd came in their regular order. Donna Marsh from the insurance office next door stopped in for her standing Tuesday order, black coffee, wheat toast, a hard-boiled egg, and sat at the end of the counter with the newspaper and did not say a word about anything she had seen from her window the previous day. Sarah waited. She knew Donna. She had known Donna for 4 years, and Donna was a woman who held observations the way some people held cards close private until she decided the moment was right. It had always struck Sarah as an odd quality in someone who had been one of the first people to call her the night of the storm, who had been so certain and so urgent about what Sarah should do. At 8:50, Donna folded her newspaper. The drainage work they did on the east side, she said without looking up. My father had the same problem with his property in Havre. He put in a French drain, took 2 days, and it never gave him trouble again. Sarah looked at her. The men who did it yesterday said the same thing. They're coming back to finish it next week. Donna nodded slowly. Good, she said. That kind of thing gets expensive if you let it go. She picked up her newspaper again. Sarah waited another moment. Donna, she said. Donna looked up. Thank you for calling me, Sarah said. That night, I know you were worried. I know everybody was. Donna looked at her with an expression Sarah had not seen on her face before, which was the expression of someone choosing between two responses and making a decision. I called because I was afraid, Donna said, and I was afraid because I didn't know them. And I didn't know them because... She stopped. She pressed her lips together in the way of a woman who was making herself finish a sentence she would rather have left unfinished. Because I never tried to, she said. That's the honest answer. Sarah nodded. Donna picked up her newspaper again. But when she left at 9:10, she left $3 more than her usual tip. It was not a large gesture. But in Mason Ridge, where people expressed things sideways and indirectly and through accumulated small actions rather than direct declaration, Sarah understood exactly what it meant. The call from Ray Dominguez came at 10:45. She took it in the back office door closed because she had learned that she could hold difficult news better in a smaller space, that the size of the room affected the size of the thing somehow. I spoke with Gerald Hastings this morning, Ray said. Sarah sat down. And Frank Kowalski is a very effective person to have in your corner, Ray said, and there was something in his voice that took her a moment to identify because she hadn't heard it from him before. It was cautious satisfaction. He reached out to Hastings yesterday evening before I did, which I'll be honest, I was mildly annoyed at the timing, but his read on the approach was right. And Hastings' initial response was more open than I expected. What does open mean? Sarah said. She needed specific things. She was done with impressions. It means Hastings is willing to discuss a formal forbearance agreement, 6 months minimum, during which the foreclosure proceedings are suspended and the payments are restructured to an amount your current revenue can service. A pause. Sarah, this is good news. This is genuinely good news. She pressed her hand against the desk, her father's desk, the one she had never replaced because replacing it would have been replacing something. What do I need to do? She said. You need to come to Billings next week with your last 2 years of financials and a forward projection. I'll help you with the projection. Frank's offered to be in the room, which I think we should take him up on because Hastings knows him and that matters. Ray paused again. I also want to say something that's not strictly financial advice. Say it. Whatever happened in that parking lot of yours, whatever those people are doing for your business, it's already visible in the numbers. Your Tuesday reservation list is longer than it's been in 2 years. A food writer from the Billings paper called to ask about the diner's history yesterday. I don't know how any of that happened, but it's happening, and Hastings can see trending numbers just as well as I can. Sarah was quiet for a moment. She thought about the highway workers telling the story at table 4 and 5, about Pat's phone call, about Carl Hendrick's brother driving by and reporting back to Carl, who called Pat, who called Sarah, about the specific and unstoppable way that stories move through small communities once they found traction. She had not done anything to make the story move. She had just opened a door. Thank you, Ray, she said. Thank Frank, he said, and Tommy. and whoever else you've apparently collected." She hung up and sat in the quiet office for 30 seconds, which was all she allowed herself, and then she went back out to the counter. George Mercer was waiting. He was at his usual corner table, but he had moved his chair so that he was facing the counter rather than the window, which was a deviation from 22 years of habit, significant enough that Sarah noticed it immediately. She brought him his coffee before he asked. "Sit down," he said. She looked at him. George Mercer did not ask people to sit down. George Mercer occupied his table, and the world arranged itself around that occupation. She sat across from him. He was in his late 70s, George. White-haired, thick-handed, the kind of face that outdoor decades produced. He had farmed 20 miles north of Mason Ridge for 40 years before his son took over the operation, and he had been coming to this diner since Dale Whitmore ran it, which meant he had known Sarah since she was a child, bringing people their coffee refills on Saturday mornings. "I owe you something," he said. She waited. "I was one of the people that called Brent Calloway that night," he said. "When the bikes came through, I didn't call you. I called Brent. I told him someone needed to do something about the situation." He looked at his coffee cup. "I was sitting in my truck at the gas station when I saw them come through. I could see your diner from where I parked." Sarah was very still. "I watched you come outside," George said. "I watched you cross that parking lot in your apron." In the snow, he shook his head slowly. "My first thought was that you were making a terrible mistake. My second thought was—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together in a way that reminded Sarah without warning of Donna Marsh an hour earlier. Different people, same gesture. The gesture of someone making themselves say the honest thing. "My second thought was that I was sitting in my truck in the warm, and a woman half my age was crossing a parking lot in the snow to help a man who was down, and I didn't move." The diner was quiet around them. "George," she started, "let me finish. Not harsh, just firm. I have lived in this town my whole life. I came to your father's diner for 30 years. Dale Whitmore was one of the best men I knew, and one of the things that made him good was that he never let what something looked like on the outside determine how he treated it. He would have been out that door before you." George looked at her directly. "You are exactly your father's daughter. I want you to know that I see that. And I want you to know that I was wrong." Sarah looked at the man across the table from her arm. She thought about all the phone calls that night, all the voices. Lock the door, turn off the lights, be smart, be safe, let them figure it out. She had not been angry about those calls. She had understood them even as she walked past them, because fear was a reasonable response to the unknown, and the town did not know those people, and the unknown is where fear lived. But hearing George say it, this man who had known her father, who had watched her grow up, who had the weight of that history in his face when he looked at her, something settled in her that she hadn't known was unsettled. "You're here now," she said. "I'm here now," he agreed. "That counts," she said. He looked at her. "Your father used to say that," he said. "Showing up late is not the same as not showing up." She picked up his coffee cup, went and refilled it, brought it back. He watched her do it. "Those men who were working out there yesterday," he said, "the drainage problem on the east side, did they fix it? They're coming back next week to finish." "My son has a backhoe," George said. "It would go faster." She looked at him for a moment. "You want to call your son?" "I want to call my son," George said, "if that's acceptable." "That's more than acceptable," Sarah said. George pulled out his phone and made the call right there at the table. The week moved differently than any week Sarah could remember in the past 18 months. Not easier was not the right word. There was still the logistics of the Billings meeting to prepare for. Still the cooler compressor running on borrowed time pending the parts arrival. Still the daily arithmetic of a small business operating on a margin that required everything to go mostly right for the numbers to work. None of that had changed. What had changed was the texture of the weight. She had been carrying something alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have any of it distributed, and the redistribution was not something she had engineered or planned. It had arrived the way the storm had arrived, from a direction she hadn't been watching, with a force that rearranged things before she could decide whether to resist. Tommy came back Wednesday with the cooler compressor part, which had arrived 2 days early, which Tommy accepted with the equanimity of a man for whom things often arrived 2 days early because he had relationships with suppliers that went back decades. And those relationships had a way of generating informal priority. He installed it in 90 minutes. He did not invoice her. She did not fight him on it this time because she had learned in the past 2 weeks that fighting Tommy on certain things was an expenditure of energy that produced no result. It's got another 4 or 5 years in it now, he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. After that, you're looking at a new unit. I'll give you the specs so you know what you're budgeting for. Tommy, she said. I'll give you the specs, he said with the finality of a man closing a subject. She looked at him. Can I ask you something? You can ask. That night, after you all left, what did you think about it on the road into the days after? Tommy put the cloth down and considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, which she had already come to understand was his default mode. He did not give quick answers because he did not have quick thoughts. He had considered thoughts arrived at through a process that was neither rushed nor careless. I thought about my mother, he said. She died when I was 11. Our situation was not good. After she died, I went to live with my uncle and his family, and they had nothing. Less than nothing. My uncle worked 2 jobs and my aunt worked 1, and there were 6 kids in that house and there was never enough. He paused. But every Sunday she made dinner for whoever needed it, whoever came by. Didn't matter who they were, or what they looked like, or what the neighbors thought about them being there. She said, you have a table, you have an obligation. Sarah held very still. You have a table, Tommy said. You have an obligation. That's what you did. That's exactly what you did. He picked up his bag. Your father understood that. I could tell just from what Danny said about him that your father understood that. You learned it from the right place. He left through the back the same way he'd come in. Sarah stood in her kitchen for a long moment till the door closed. Then she went and started prep for the lunch service. This day. On Thursday, Ethan Walker came through the front door at 11 in the morning. She knew it was him before she fully processed that she was seeing him because there was something in the posture and the way he moved road-certain, unhurried the gait of a man who had covered long distances and made peace with the covering of them that registered in her peripheral vision before her brain supplied the name. She stopped. He came to the counter and sat on the stool nearest the register, which was not the stool she would have predicted for him, and he looked at her with the clear eyes that she had first seen properly at 11:30 on the night of the storm, when the hypothermia fog was lifting and his focus was coming back. You look better, she said. I feel better, he said. I feel significantly better than the last time you saw me horizontal. Coffee, please. She poured it and put it in front of him and waited because she could tell from the way he had sat down, deliberate, positioned, present, that he had come with something specific and would get to it in his own time. He wrapped his hands around the mug. I want to tell you something, he said, and I want to tell you directly, not through Jack, because Jack tends to, he summarizes, he's good at the overview, but this is the detail, and the detail is mine to tell. Okay, she said. Ethan looked at his coffee for a moment. I told you that night that my wife would have liked you, and you asked what her name was, and I told you Claire, and you asked if she was good people. I remember. What I didn't tell you, he said, is that Claire died in January, this January, 8 months ago. He kept his eyes on the coffee mug and his voice level in the way of someone who has practiced saying a thing until they can say it without breaking, though the practice does not make it easy, only possible. She was sick for 2 years. I was with her for 2 years, and then I wasn't. And then I went on the road because the road was the only thing I knew how to do, and I didn't know what else to do with myself. Sarah didn't say anything. She gave him the space the words needed. The night in the pass, Ethan said. When the storm came in, I knew it was bad. I knew it before the others did, I think, but He stopped. He looked up. His eyes were clear, but they were doing something complicated. I don't think I was being careful, he said, about myself. I don't think I was being careful because I wasn't sure it mattered whether I was careful. The diner was quiet. The lunch crowd had not yet arrived. The only other people in the room were a man at the far end reading something on his phone and 2 women at table 3 who were deep in their own conversation. Ethan, Sarah said. I'm okay, he said immediately. I'm telling you this because I'm okay, not because I'm not. I'm telling you because of what happened next, which is that I was face down in your parking lot, and a woman I had never met came out in the cold and put her hands on me and said she had me. He looked at her, and something happened in that moment. Something I did not expect and cannot fully explain. She waited. I decided to stay, he said. 2 words, 4 syllables. She understood their entire weight. I decided to stay, he said, again quieter. Not dramatically, not as a big moment, just I felt your hands and I heard your voice, and something in me that had been pointed in a direction I shouldn't have let it point at decided to come back around. He looked down at the coffee. I don't think you can understand how much that matters. I'm not sure I have the words for it. Sarah looked at the man across the counter from her. She thought about what her father had said, you don't get to call yourself a good person, and then find reasons not to act like one. She thought about the 11 seconds behind the locked door. She thought about how close she had come to staying inside, how the math of self-preservation had been right there available, reasonable, well supported by the evidence of every phone call she'd received. I'm glad you're here, she said. It was simple, and she meant it completely. Ethan looked at her for a moment. I came to tell you that, he said, and to tell you the other thing. What's the other thing? He reached into his jacket and put an envelope on the counter. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. What is this? Open it, he said. She opened it. It was a check. She looked at the number. She looked at the number again. She looked at Ethan. This is too much, she said. Her voice came out differently than she intended. It's what I have, he said. Claire had a life insurance policy. I've been not touching it because touching it felt like, I don't know, like spending something I wasn't ready to spend. But she would, he stopped. He started again. She would have done exactly what you did. The night of the storm, she would have been out that door and she would have been angry at anyone who wasn't. And using this money to make sure that door stays open is the most Claire thing I can think to do with it. He pushed the envelope slightly toward her. So that's what I'm doing with it. Sarah looked at the check. The number on it, combined with what Frank and Ray were putting together for the bank meeting, combined with the trending revenue, combined with the 6-month forbearance that Gerald Hastings was apparently willing to discuss. The combination of all of it added up to something she had not let herself believe was possible 3 weeks ago. It added up to the diner still being here. Not just surviving, actually here, actually stable, actually able to be what her father had built it to be. Ethan, she said. Don't, he said gently. Don't thank me. This is selfish. This is me doing the thing that makes me feel closest to Claire right now, which is what she would have done. You're doing me a favor by letting me do it. She looked at the check. She thought about the letter that used to be in the drawer. She thought about standing at the window at midnight watching 67 taillights disappear and thinking tomorrow the letter is still there. She thought about saying out loud in an empty diner, I'm not going to lose this place. She carefully folded the envelope and held it. Tell me about her, Sarah said. Tell me about Claire. Ethan looked up and something in his face shifted, a careful, particular kind of opening, like a window that had been shut for a long time being raised by someone who wasn't sure yet how much air they wanted. She made terrible coffee, he said. I say that knowing you are a professional. She was genuinely impressively bad at coffee. She had opinions about everything else, food, music, people, politics, motorcycle routes, which is how we met, but coffee she just could not get right. How long were you together? 19 years, he said. Married for 16. Kids? No, a pause that had texture in it. We wanted to, it didn't happen. We'd made peace with it. She always said we just get to take care of more people instead. She treated that like an upgrade, not a consolation. He looked at his coffee. That was very Claire. She sounds like someone who understood what having a table means, Sarah said. He looked at her. Tommy told me something today, she said. His aunt. She said you have a table, you have an obligation. Ethan was quiet. Yeah, he said finally. Claire would have said it exactly like that. He picked up his coffee. She would have driven a motorcycle through a blizzard to get to this diner. Sarah smiled. I would have let her in. I know, Ethan said. That's why I came. The lunch crowd arrived and Ethan stayed, which she had not expected and which she did not comment on. He stayed on his stool at the end of the counter with a refilled coffee and a plate of food she put in front of him without asking. She was making a habit of this, she realized, and he watched the diner. The way people watched things that interested them with a focused, unhurried attention. She moved through the service and felt him there, the way you feel a solid thing in a room, the way presence communicates itself without requiring any particular action. At 1:15, George Mercer came in for his afternoon coffee, which was a Tuesday-Thursday habit, and he walked past Ethan's stool and stopped. He looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at him. "You're one of them," George said, not hostile, just recognizing. "I am," Ethan said. George sat down 2 stools over which, in George Mercer terms, was practically adjacent. He ordered his coffee. He looked straight ahead. "I've got a son with a backhoe," he said in the manner of a man making a statement he had already cleared internally and was now delivering as fact. "He's coming next week to finish the drainage work." Ethan looked at him for a moment. "That's good," he said. "I was one of the people who said to keep the door closed," George said, still looking forward, still not looking at Ethan. A beat of quiet. "She opened it anyway," Ethan said. "She did," George said. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup in the exact same way Ethan had wrapped his hands around his. 2 men 20 years apart, the same gesture. "She's her father's daughter." "I believe it," Ethan said. They drank their coffee. Sarah behind the counter watched this from the corner of her eye and did not say anything, because some things did not need narrating, and this was one of them. 2 men, 2 different worlds, 2 different experiences of the same night, sitting 2 stools apart and finding the narrow piece of common ground that the night had made available to them. It was not a transformation. Mason Ridge was not going to be transformed by 1 night and 2 weeks of work and a man with a backhoe. People were not transformed so cleanly, so completely. What happened in real life was smaller and messier and more durable than transformation. It was adjustment. It was a slight recalibration of the way you looked at something, which over time changed what you were able to see. That was what she was watching. She refilled their cups without being asked, the way her father had always done, and went back to the kitchen. At 3 o'clock, while Danny was at school and the afternoon quiet had settled over the diner, Jack Reynolds called. "How's Ethan?" he said immediately. "He was here until 2, she said. "He's good, Jack. He's really good." A breath on the other end, the exhale of a man who had been holding something. "He told you." "He told me." "About Claire, about—" Jack stopped. "He told me everything," Sarah said. "It's okay. He needed to tell it." Jack was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, private. "I've been watching him for 8 months, he said. Watching him and not knowing what to do. You can't fix grief. You can't ride alongside it fast enough to keep up. All you can do is be there, and sometimes being there isn't enough, and that—" He stopped again. "That's a hard thing to live with. Watching someone you care about and not being able to reach them." Sarah thought about 18 months of carrying things alone, about the specific loneliness of needing something you don't know how to ask for. "You were there," she said. "You stayed. That's not nothing, Jack. That's everything." He was quiet for a long moment. "He said something to me this morning before he left," Jack said. "He said, 'I think I'm going to be okay.'" First time he said that in 8 months. First time. His voice was doing something. She recognized the effort of a man holding a feeling he had not expected to be ambushed by. "I don't know how to tell you what that means." "You don't have to," she said. Outside, she heard a car slow down, check the parking lot, and pull in. The bell above the door rang as the afternoon's first new customer arrived. "I have a customer," she said. "Go," he said. "I'll call you before the billings meeting." She hung up. She went back out to the counter. She went back to work. She was still afraid about some things. The billings meeting was in 6 days, and the forbearance was not yet signed, and the east drainage was not yet finished, and the cooler compressor was new, but the unit itself was aging, and the staffing situation remained what it had always been, which was her and whoever Danny could be talked into helping on weekends. But the fear was different now. It was specific. It had edges. It was the size of the actual problems and not the size of everything she had ever worried might go wrong, which was the size fear grew to when it lived in the dark. She had taken the bank letter out of the drawer. She had put it where she could see it, and that turned out to make all the difference. Not solving it, not fixing it, but seeing it clearly, holding it at arm's length in the light, where it could only be what it actually was and nothing more. She thought about Ethan saying, "I decided to stay." She thought about herself 3 weeks ago counting 11 seconds behind a locked door. She thought about her father's hands on this counter building, something that was supposed to outlast him, and the way it had outlasted him, and the way she was going to make sure it kept outlasting. Danny's fax notebook was under the counter. She picked it up and opened it to the page after Chuck's chili recipe. In Danny's handwriting, careful and serious, the way he wrote things he considered important. When everything looks impossible, find the one thing that isn't. Start there, Chuck Marine Biker dishwasher, good at chili. Sarah looked at this for a moment. She thought I started there. I'm still starting there. She put the notebook back. The customer at the new table was looking at her menu with the focused attention of someone who was going to take their time deciding which was fine, which was exactly fine, because she had time and the diner was warm and the door was open. The Billings meeting happened on a Tuesday. Sarah drove the 2 hours alone, which she had considered and decided on deliberately. Pat had offered to come. Jack had offered to have Frank drive her. Ray had offered to meet her at a coffee shop first, so she wouldn't walk into the bank building cold. She had thanked all of them and gotten in her truck at 6:30 in the morning by herself, because this was something she needed to do, the way she needed to do it, arriving under her own power in her own time with everything she had built. In the past 3 weeks, carried inside her rather than arranged around her. She had the folder Ray had helped her prepare. She had Frank's analysis clean and organized, the kind of document that spoke the language banks spoke and said what it needed to say without apology. She had her revenue history for 2 years, which showed the 4-month upward trend that she had been living inside without seeing the way you can't see the shape of a hill while you're climbing it. She had Ethan's check, which she had deposited, which had changed the number in her account from a thing that required courage to look at into a thing that was still not comfortable, but was no longer desperate. She drove. Montana in November did what Montana in November did. Hard, clear sky, the kind of cold that was committed to itself, the highway running through it all like a line someone had drawn with a steady hand. She drove, and she did not listen to music, and she did not call anyone. She thought about her father, which was something she did often on long drives because Dale Whitmore had been a man who thought clearly in motion, and she had inherited this. She thought about what he would say walking into Gerald Hastings' office. She knew what he would say. He would say, tell the truth about where you are and where you're going. Banks don't fund the past, they fund the future. Show him your future. She had a future to show. She parked at 8:55. She sat in the truck for 2 minutes. She got out and went inside. Gerald Hastings was not what she had built him into. She had been building him for 3 weeks in her head, from his letter, from his signature, from the number he had attached to a deadline, into something impersonal and final, the institutional face of the thing that was trying to take her father's diner. She had known intellectually that this was what fear did, that it turned people into symbols of the worst possible outcome. But knowing it intellectually and walking into a room and seeing a 60-year-old man in a gray suit who stood up when she came in and shook her hand firmly and said, Sarah, it's good to meet you. I've heard a great deal about this diner. Those were different experiences. Frank was already there. Ray was already there. They had arranged themselves on her side of the table with the quiet deliberateness of people who had done this before and knew what the arrangement communicated. She sat between them. Thank you for coming in, Gerald said. He looked at her directly, which she noted and appreciated. People who couldn't look you in the eye during difficult conversations were the difficult kind to deal with. I want to start by saying that what Frank shared with me last week changed how I was reading this file. I was looking at a snapshot. He helped me see the trajectory. That's what I needed you to see, Sarah said. He nodded. The 4-month trend is real. It's not dramatic, but it's consistent. And in my experience, consistent is more reliable than dramatic. He opened his own folder. I also received a call from a reporter at the Billings Gazette last week asking about a story they're running on the diner, about what happened last month. I understand there's been some significant community involvement. There has, Sarah said. He looked at her. That kind of attention has value that doesn't show up in a revenue statement. It shows up in the months after. In my experience with small businesses, community visibility either burns out in 2 weeks or it compounds. What I've been hearing about your situation sounds like the second kind. She thought about George Mercer calling his son with the backhoe. She thought about Donna Marsh and her $3 extra. She thought about the highway workers telling the story at table 4 and 5, about the Tuesday reservation list that Ray had mentioned was longer than it had been in 2 years. It's the second kind, she said. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Frank was precise and calm and said the right things at the right moments in the way of someone who had sat in many rooms like this one and had learned exactly how much space to give each part of a conversation. Ray was thorough and credible and pushed back on 2 points that Gerald raised firmly and with documentation in a way that Gerald visibly respected. Sarah spoke when she needed to speak and listened when she needed to listen and did not fill silence with apology, which was something she had trained herself out of over the past 3 weeks, the habit of softening things that didn't need softening. At 10:47, Gerald Hastings put his pen down. "I think we can do the 6 months," he said, with the restructured payment schedule Frank outlined. "I want the forward projections updated at the 60-day mark, which is standard for this type of agreement." He looked at Sarah. "This is not a guarantee of anything beyond 6 months. I want to be clear about that." "I know," she said. 6 months is enough." "How are you confident of that?" he said, not challenging, genuinely asking. She looked at him. "Because I've been doing this alone for a year and a half, and I'm not doing it alone anymore," she said. And the difference between those two situations is not something that shows up in a financial statement, but it's real. Gerald Hastings looked at her for a long moment. "Your father built that diner," he said. "He did." "I ate there once," he said, 15 years ago, passing through on the way to Glacier. "Best pie I've had in Montana." He picked up his pen. "Let's get this drafted." Sarah exhaled. Underneath the table where no one could see it, she pressed her hand flat against her leg and held it there for 3 seconds, a private acknowledgement, a small ceremony for no audience. She thought, "Dad, we're okay." She thought, "We're going to be okay." She called Pat from the parking lot. "It's done," she said when Pat picked up. Pat made a sound that was not quite a word. 6 months, Sarah said. Restructured payments. Frank and Ray are both satisfied with the terms. "Oh, thank God," Pat said, and then her voice did something that Pat's voice very rarely did, which was break slightly just at the edges. "Sarah, oh, thank God. I know. Are you okay? Are you—" Pat stopped. "You're crying." "I'm not crying," Sarah said. She was crying. It had ambushed her the moment she got to the truck, where the moment there was no one watching, the moment the thing she had been holding so tightly for so long was allowed to shift into something else, something that did not require quite so much force to hold. "You can cry," Pat said. "You are allowed to cry." "I know," Sarah said, crying. "I'm making dinner tonight," Pat said. "You and Danny in my house, 7 o'clock. I'm not asking." "Okay," Sarah said. "Okay," Pat said. "Drive safe. Call me when you're back in town." She hung up. She sat in the truck in the bank parking lot in Billings and cried for 4 minutes, which was not a long time, but which was the right amount of time, which was exactly as long as it needed to be, and then she wiped her face and started the truck and drove home. The Gazette story ran on Thursday. Sarah had talked to the reporter, a woman named Kim Reyes, who had the particular quality of a journalist who listened more than she spoke, which was the quality Sarah trusted, for 45 minutes the previous Friday. She had told the story straight. She had not embellished, and she had not minimized, and she had not tried to make herself sound braver than she had been, which meant she told Kim about the 11 seconds behind the locked door, and Kim had written it down and nodded and said, "That's the most honest thing anyone has told me in an interview in 6 months." The headline was, "One Open Door, How a Montana Diner and 67 Bikers Reminded a Town What Community Looks Like." Sarah read it at the counter before the morning rush with a cup of coffee and Danny beside her still in his school clothes, because he had gotten up early specifically to read it, which was the most invested he had been in a piece of printed journalism in his 9 years of life. He read it silently, which he did not do with things that weren't important. When he finished, he looked up and said, "She got Ethan's part right." "She did," Sarah said. "In the part about Grandpa." "Yes. And she spelled Chuck's name wrong," Danny said. Sarah looked. He was right. "I'll call her." Danny read the story again from the beginning. "Mom," he said at the part about the 11 seconds. "Yeah. Why did you count them?" She thought about this. "Because I knew I was going to open the door," she said, "but I needed a second to understand what I was deciding." He looked at her with the expression he used when he was processing something he wanted to remember. "And then you did it anyway." "And then I did it anyway." He nodded slowly with the gravity of someone filing this information in a place they intended to keep it. "Good," he said. She looked at her son, 10 years old in 3 months, growing with the particular momentum of children who have been paying attention to the adults around them and absorbing things faster than the adults realize. He had been in the fax notebook again last night. She had seen the light under the office door and not said anything because whatever he was writing in that notebook was his and he would tell her when he was ready. She was raising a person who paid attention, who asked the honest question, who wanted to know why you counted the seconds before you did the thing. She thought, whatever else I've managed to do wrong, I got this part right. The Gazette story did what Ray had said community visibility sometimes did. It compounded. A radio station in Missoula picked it up on Friday. A blog that Sarah had never heard of, but which apparently had a significant following among people who rode motorcycles, ran a piece over the weekend. By Monday, the reservation list for the following week was full through Thursday, which had never happened in the 4 years she had been running the diner, not even close. She stood looking at the reservation list on Monday morning with the specific vertigo of someone whose problem has changed shape so completely that the change itself requires adjustment. She called Pat. I need help, she said. Real help. I need a second person in the kitchen starting Wednesday. I'll do it, Pat said immediately. Pat, you have a job. I have a job that gives me Wednesdays and Thursdays off, Pat said, which you know because I've told you this many times. I can work those days. I can't pay you what you're worth, Sarah said. You can pay me what you have, Pat said. We'll figure out the rest later. That's what you do now, right? One thing at a time. Sarah laughed. You've been talking to Danny. Danny told me about Chuck's note in the fax notebook, Pat said. He told me you quote it to yourself. He said he hears you sometimes in the kitchen when you think he's asleep. Sarah was quiet for a moment. She had not known he could hear her. He's proud of you, Pat said. He doesn't have the words for it yet exactly, but he is. Oh, Angela called on Tuesday. Sarah had been expecting this call and not expecting it, which was a state she had been living in frequently lately. The sense that things were in motion that she couldn't fully see, but could feel the way you feel a current in water. Angela was in Great Falls, which was 3 hours north. She had a nonprofit called Common Table, which Sarah had looked up after the first night and found to be a serious organization with real funding and a track record of small business preservation work in rural Montana communities. I want to come down next week, Angela said. If that's okay, I want to look at what you've built and tell you honestly what I see in terms of longer-term sustainability support. There are 2 grant programs that your situation might qualify for. I don't want to promise anything, but I want to look. Angela, Sarah said. I know, Angela said. You're going to tell me I don't have to. You don't have to. I know, Angela said. But Ethan is alive, and the reason Ethan is alive is that a woman I'd never met made a decision, and I watched her make it, and it was the most clear-eyed thing I've seen in a long time, and I want to do something with that. A pause. I've been doing this nonprofit work for 8 years. You know what the hardest part is? What? Convincing people that the help is real, that it's not going to disappear, that the people offering it actually mean it. Another pause. I mean it. I just want you to know that. I know, Sarah said. I believe you. Good night, Angela said. I'll see you next week. Oh. Jack came back on this first Saturday of December. He came alone, which was different. He came in a truck rather than on a bike, which meant he had driven the whole way rather than ridden, which in Montana in December was a practical decision, but also communicated something about the nature of the visit, that this was not a group occasion, that this was something else. He came in at 9 in the morning before the Saturday rush and sat at the counter in what had quietly become his stool. One at the far end, the one where he could see the whole room, and Sarah poured his coffee without asking because she had stopped asking Jack Reynolds what he wanted some weeks ago. They sat in the early quiet. How are you? He said. Good, she said. Actually good, not performing good. I can tell, he said. You look different than you did that night. How? He thought about it with the seriousness he brought to thinking about things. Like you're not carrying the whole thing by yourself anymore, he said. Like you set some of it down. She considered this. Some of it, she agreed. Not all of it. It's still my diner. It's still my kitchen at 5:30 in the morning and my books on Sunday night and my problem to solve when something breaks. But it's different when you know people will show up, she said. The weight doesn't change. What changes is you know you don't have to collapse under it alone. That changes everything. Jack drank his coffee. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask Hawk. Ethan told me what he did, he said, with Claire's insurance. He told me after the fact, which is that's Ethan, he does things and then tells you. I wanted to make sure you're okay with how it happened, that it didn't feel like, he searched for the right word, like something you couldn't say no to. She looked at him. Did Ethan seem like someone who needed to do it? Yes. Then I was never going to say no, she said. That was never about me being unable to refuse. That was about him needing somewhere to put something that had nowhere to go. She paused. Claire sounds like she would have understood that immediately. Jack was quiet. She would have, he said. She would have told him to do it before he'd finished the sentence. Then we honored her correctly, Sarah said. He looked at his coffee. Yeah, he said. We did. Danny came out of the back at 9:40, which was later than his usual Saturday appearance, but within normal parameters for a child who had been up until 10 the previous night, writing in his fax notebook. He came out, saw Jack, and his face did the thing it did when something pleased him. You're back, he said. I'm back, Jack said. Danny climbed onto the stool next to him with the ease of a child who had made a decision about a person and was done revisiting it. Did you eat? Not yet. Mom makes good eggs, Danny said with the authority of someone reporting a fact he considered underappreciated. I've heard that, Jack said. Danny looked at him. Did Chuck tell you? Tommy mentioned it. Danny nodded gravely. Tommy's right. He looked at his mother. Can we make eggs? I was already going to, she said. She made eggs. She made them the way her father had taught her, which was with more butter than was strictly necessary and more patience than most people applied to eggs, and she put the plates down in front of both of them and went back to the kitchen to start the prep for the rush. And she listened to Danny talk to Jack about the facts, notebook and the chili recipe, and the thing he was currently researching, which was the history of Montana highway construction. Because he had heard Ethan mention the mountain pass and had decided he needed to understand why mountain passes existed and how they got built, Jack listened to all of it with the full attention she had watched him bring to everything, not politely, not tolerantly, but genuinely. He asked a question about elevation gradients that Danny could not answer, and which Danny immediately wrote in the notebook as something to find out. She listened to this from the kitchen and felt something settle in her that she had been waiting to settle for a long time. Not the end of hard things. Hard things were not over, would not be over. That was not how life worked, and she had never believed it was. The cooler was going to need replacing in 4 or 5 years. The staffing situation was better, but not solved. The forbearance was 6 months, and 6 months was not forever. But this is ordinary Saturday morning eggs and coffee and a 9-year-old explaining highway engineering to a man in a leather cut. This was real, and it was hers, and it was the thing her father had been building toward all along without knowing exactly what shape it would take. A place where people came and were fed and felt known. A place where anyone could walk through the door and find something warm. 1 year after the storm, Sarah stood outside. It was the same cold Montana December, committed to itself the same way every year. Consistent in that, at least reliable in its demands. She stood in the parking lot in her coat, not her apron this time, just her coat, and she looked at the diner her father had built. The sign was new. Not new, she had put it up 2 months ago after Angela's grant came through, and the 6-month forbearance converted to a permanent restructuring agreement that Frank and Ray had both called better than expected, which was the most enthusiastic either of them tended to get about anything. The sign was the same shape as the old one, the same position, but the text was different. It said, Whitmore's Everyone Has a Place Here. Her father's philosophy, the one he had lived so completely that it had become the air in the building, the temperature of it, the particular quality of the light. She had put it on the sign because she had decided it was time to say it out loud, to post it where everyone could see it, to make the promise visible, in public, and accountable. She heard tires on the parking lot behind her. She turned. Motorcycles, not 67, 12, maybe 15 pulling in from the highway with the deliberate calm of people who knew where they were going. She recognized some of the faces through the helmets before they even took them off. Tommy, Angela, who had apparently ridden down from Great Falls, which was a fact that pleased Sarah more than she expected. Melissa, Ethan's riding companion from the mountain pass, who had come back twice since that night and was on a first-name basis with Pat and had a standing order for the Tuesday soup. And Ethan, he pulled in last, which she suspected was intentional. He parked and cut the engine and took his helmet off and looked at her across the parking lot with those clear eyes that she had first seen properly at 11:30 on the night that changed everything, and he smiled, which was a thing he did more easily now than he had in December a year ago. She raised a hand. He raised his. Jack climbed out of a truck. He was the truck. Now she had learned he had sold the bike 6 months ago, a decision he had made quietly and told her about in the same quiet way, saying only that it was the right time, that he had put enough miles on enough roads, and was ready to put some miles on some stationary things for a while. He came to stand beside her. He looked at the sign. Your father's words, he said. His philosophy, she said. He never wrote it down, but it's what he lived. Jack looked at it for a long moment. Good sign, he said. Good man, she said. Danny came out the front door to run, which was his standard movement style, and pulled up short when he saw the crowd in the parking lot, and then broke into the grin that she lived for, full face and guarded the grin of a child who had learned that surprise was usually good. You all came, he said. We said we would, Ethan said from across the lot. Last year you said next year, Danny said. I wasn't sure if that was a real promise or a polite thing. We don't do polite things, Tommy said. Danny considered this, filed it. Do you want eggs? He said to the assembled group with the authority of a 10-year-old who had been helping in a diner kitchen for the past year and had developed opinions about hospitality. Laughter moved through the group the way it had moved through the diner on that first night, catching genuine the kind that came from the chest. We want eggs, Melissa said. Then come inside, Danny said. He turned and went back through the door with the confidence of someone who knew people would follow. They followed. Inside was warm and loud in the way that Whitmore's was warm and loud now, on its busy days, which were more days than not. Pat was behind the counter already moving because Pat had the particular gift of reading a room's needs before the room had finished walking in the door. She had been full-time for 6 months, and the books had adjusted, and the adjustment had required one conversation and 2 spreadsheets in a Sunday afternoon with Ray on the phone, and it had worked. The diner had expanded. Not the building was the same building it had always been, same square footage, same bones her father had loved. But the capacity had increased because Tommy had reorganized the furniture layout in a way that added 4 seats without anyone feeling cramped, which was the kind of solution that came from someone who had spent 40 years thinking about how people move through spaces, and it had made a difference that Sarah was still slightly amazed by. George Mercer was in his corner booth. He was always in his corner booth. His son had finished the drainage work in early spring, and George had come by to inspect it personally, and after inspecting it, he had sat down and ordered coffee and stayed for 2 hours, which was longer than his usual visits, and this had become his new habit without any discussion. He looked up when the group came in. He looked at Ethan. Ethan stopped at his booth. How's the drainage? Ethan said. Good, George said. My son did a good job. Glad to hear it. You staying for eggs? I'm staying for eggs. George nodded once firmly and went back to his newspaper. Ethan moved on. Sarah had come to understand the full range of their relationship, which had been established on 2 stools in December and had remained exactly that and was exactly right for both of them. Sarah stood at the counter and watched her diner fill. She watched Tommy take the stool he always took and Angela sit beside him and start showing him something on her phone, something about the second grant application which was in progress, which Angela was managing with the organized tenacity that Sarah had come to understand was simply how Angela operated in all areas of her life. She watched Melissa find Pat immediately and start a conversation that clearly had a prior thread, because Pat picked it up in the middle, no preamble. The way you picked up conversations with people you had established a continuity with. She watched Jack find a table. He took a table. Now he said the counter was better for people who needed to be in the middle of things, and he preferred an angle and settle into it with his coffee and his quiet attention and the particular stillness of a man who was comfortable. She watched Danny move through all of it with the ease of a child who had grown up in this place and understood its rhythms the way she understood them, instinctive and physical, the knowledge of a space that was part of you. And she thought about the night. She thought about it the way she had thought about it many times in the past year. Not obsessively, not with the grinding repetition of something unresolved, but with the particular quality of attention you bring to a moment that changed the shape of things, examining it from different angles, finding new things in it, understanding it more fully each time. 11 seconds. She had counted them. She had stood behind a locked door with every reasonable argument for staying there, and she had counted 11 seconds, and then she had unlocked it. And from that 11 seconds had come Ethan alive. Claire honored Tommy's aunt's philosophy landing in a fax notebook. Danny knowing what courage looked like before he had the word for it. George Mercer calling his son with the backhoe. Donna Marsh leaving $3 extra. Ray and Frank in the same room, 6 months becoming permanent, the sign outside saying the thing her father had believed for 40 years. From 11 seconds. She thought about what Jack had said early on before any of this in those first hours. You didn't hesitate. She had hesitated, 11 seconds, but she had opened the door, and she understood now what the difference was between hesitating and not doing, between fear and paralysis, between being afraid and letting the fear decide for you. She had been afraid. She was still afraid of things, smaller things, now more specific things with names and addresses and realistic solutions. Fear was not something you graduated from. It was something you learned to carry without letting it drive. Her father had known this. He had said it in different words so many times that she had filed it as furniture rather than wisdom, and she had carried it for 34 years without fully understanding what she was carrying. And then she had stood behind a locked door in a blizzard and understood it all at once. The way you understand something, you have always known when the moment finally arrives that requires you to actually know it. You don't get to call yourself a good person and then find reasons not to act like one. You either do the thing or you don't. The reasons don't matter. She picked up the coffee pot. She went out to her people. She refilled Jack's cup and Tommy's and Angela's and Melissa's and the couple from table 2 who had come in from the highway and didn't know anyone here and were watching the room with the tentative pleasure of people discovering a place they wanted to come back to. She went to Ethan last. He was at the booth by the window. Ethan's booth now, unofficially the way certain seats in certain places became associated with certain people through repetition and recognition. He had a cup of coffee, and he was looking out the window at the parking lot at the sign. Everyone has a place here, he said. That was always true, she said. I just finally wrote it down. He looked at her with the clear eyes and the smile that came easier. Now the smile of a man who had found his way back to something and knew it. Claire would have ordered the eggs, he said. I would have made them with extra butter, Sarah said. She would have loved that, he said. She refilled his cup. She went back to the kitchen. Pat was at the range and the morning was fully underway, and the diner was full of voices and the particular warmth of a space where people had been welcomed and knew it, and Danny was bussing table 3 with the efficiency of a 10-year-old who had decided this was a skill worth mastering, and outside the sign said what it said clearly, publicly without qualification. This was Whitmore's. This had always been Whitmore's. A woman who was afraid had counted to 11 and opened a door, and everything that followed, every repair and every conversation and every cup of coffee and every hard meeting in Billings and every extra dollar left on a table and every man deciding to stay had come through that door with her. And the diner stood, and the door was open. And it would stay that way because Sarah Whitmore had made a promise to a building and a memory in a 9-year-old boy who wrote important things in a fax notebook, and Sarah Whitmore kept her promises. She always had. She always would.